Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden facts buried inside one of the greatest and most haunting games ever made, Dark Souls 3. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. The Nameless King was erased from history. Long before the events of Dark Souls 3, Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, had a firstborn son. A god of war whose name was so thoroughly destroyed, so completely scoured from every record and monument, that not a single inscription or carving bearing it survived. The game never states explicitly that the Nameless King found on Archdragon Peak is this firstborn, but the evidence pointing in that direction is staggering. His armor closely resembles Gwyn's. His weapon descriptions call him a dragon-slaying god of war, an heir of lightning, and he fights with the moveset of Gwyn's knights. Putting it all together, the overwhelming reading is that this is him. He led the Dragon Slayer Knights in the ancient war against the everlasting dragons, wielding a weapon that served as both a sword and a spear. The soul of the Nameless King describes it as the earliest form of the cross spear. Item descriptions tie him to Ornstein as the Knight's Master, and his lightning power marks him as Gwyn's direct heir. And then, in an act his father considered the deepest betrayal imaginable, he abandoned the gods and allied himself with the very dragons he had spent his life hunting. Gwyn struck his firstborn's name from every record, ordered all statues of him toppled, and declared him as if he had never existed. The sole description of the Nameless King still carries the weight of that exile, simply calling him a dragon-slaying god of war who sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. His real name is gone forever, lost not to time, but to his father's fury. When you find him on Archdragon Peak, riding the King of the Storm through clouds and lightning, you are looking at a figure who appears to have chosen loyalty to a dying race over an immortal legacy. There is something quietly noble in that, and something genuinely tragic in the fact that his name will never be known. The Dancer was a noble forced into slavery. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley is one of the most memorable and visually striking bosses in all of Dark Souls 3. A towering, graceful figure trailing silk and shadow, wielding twin enchanted blades in a slow, hypnotic waltz. What most players never learn is who she was before Pontiff Sulyvahn got his hands on her. According to the soul of the Dancer, Sulyvahn bestowed his swords upon a distant daughter of the formal royal family, ordering her to serve first as a dancer and then as an outrider knight. Her crown's description confirms it as an article of the old gods, permitted only to direct descendants of the royal family. When Sulyvahn seized control of Uritel and imprisoned Gwyndolin, he turned his attention to the people of the city. The Dancer, a figure of noble standing, was forced to become his personal entertainer, literally made to dance for him. After that humiliation, Sulyvahn made things worse. He conscripted her as one of his outrider knights, which the description calls the equivalent to exile. The Pontiff gave his outrider knights his left and right eye rings, which slowly drove the wearers into a frenzied, beast-like state, robbing them of their reason, their dignity, and their humanity. Her twin enchanted blades mirror Sulyvahn's own weapons by design, dark magic on the right and flame on the left, a deliberate symbol of her subjugation. In Irithil's streets, two ghostly figures can sometimes be spotted departing from the cathedral. One male, one female, many players believe to be the Dancer and Vort before their corruption. An unused audio file found in the game's data reveals that the dancer was originally meant to laugh and giggle as she entered her boss arena. That sound never made it into the final game. Its absence makes her silence feel heavier. Sullivan was born in a painted world. Pontiff Sullivan, the architect of so much suffering in Dark Souls 3, did not come from Irithyll. He was not born into the clergy of the Way of White, nor was he raised in the halls of power he would later seize. According to the spell descriptions for Snap, Freeze and Frozen Weapon, Sullivan was born and raised inside the painted world of Ariandal, the cold, frostbound realm that serves as the setting for the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. The description notes that he departed his frigid homeland young, before he had yet experienced loss. Something about the dying, corrupted painting, or perhaps the isolation of it, lit a fire in him that cold could never fully smother. When he left, he discovered the profaned capital and the profane flame burning beneath it, a flame that could not be extinguished. That flame gave him his ambition, and his ambition gave him everything. He seized Irithyll, imprisoned Gwyndolin, fed the imprisoned god to Aldrich, and proclaimed himself pontiff. A cut sound file believed to be from the Ashes of Ariandel DLC contains a woman's voice crying out for a lost child. Voice lines that some researchers believe may connect to Sullivan's mother, a figure tied to a weeping tree creature in the painted world. If true, it paints the pontiff not only as a monster, but as a child who was once small and cold and abandoned, who found warmth in an undying fire and built his entire identity around never being powerless again. Carter is still pulling strings. The primordial serpent. Darkstalker. Carthay was one of the most important figures in the original Dark Souls, operating in the shadows and whispering to anyone who would listen that the Age of Fire was a lie perpetuated by Gwyn. In Dark Souls 3, Carthay never appears on screen. He has no body visible to the player, no dialogue to hear directly, and yet the evidence that his agenda is still being carried forward is undeniable. The clearest proof comes from Uria of Londor, the Dark Lord of the Hollow faction, who exists to guide you toward the usurpation of fire ending. If you kill Uria before that ending is reached, she speaks her dying words, and those words are, Carthay, I have failed thee. The entire Yoel and Uria quest line, the Hollow ending, the Dark Marriage ritual, the gathering of the Dark Sigils, all of it traces back to Carter. There is one wrinkle worth noting. The original Japanese translation of Uria's dying line reads closer to Carter. Your dying wish was not fulfilled, which some have taken to mean the serpent himself was already dead before the events of Dark Souls 3, his followers still carrying out a plan he could no longer see through. Whether Carthay breathes or not, his reach extends across the whole game. The usurpation of fire, where you rule as the Lord of Hollows, is his ultimate victory. And it is also somehow the ending that requires the most deliberate effort from the player, suggesting that even his most coveted outcome requires someone to actively choose it. He cannot force it. He can only plant the seed. Aldrich dreamed of the deep and crossbreed. Priscilla. Aldrich, devourer of gods, began as a common man who discovered that eating human flesh brought him great power. He ate and ate until he was no longer recognizable as human, his body an amorphous mass of sludge and bone, barely held together by the scraps of the people he had consumed. He was canonized as a saint anyway. The Church of the Deep was built around his hunger. But what makes Aldrich deeply unsettling beyond his appearance is what he dreamed. The description of the Life Hunt Scythe miracle reveals that Aldrich, in his long slumber beneath the Cathedral of the Deep, had visions while devouring Gwyndolin, and in those visions he perceived a young, pale girl in hiding. The most common reading is that this figure is crossbreed Priscilla from the original Dark Souls, the half-human, half-dragon figure, imprisoned in the painted world of Ariamis, whose life hunt ability the scythe directly echoes. Yorshka, hidden in her tower in Irithyll, is another candidate that the lore community has proposed. Whoever the pale girl was, the life hunt scythe Aldrich wields in his boss fight is a miraculous recreation of a power Priscilla was known for. And the implication many draw is that Aldrich absorbed it through his dreams of her during the slow consumption of Gwyndolin. The idea of a creature so thoroughly hollowed out by hunger that it begins dreaming of the next meal even while still finishing the last. That is the quality that makes Aldrich something beyond a simple monster. He is appetite with a horizon. Aldrich's theme is laced with Gwyndolin's music. Aldrich consumed Dark Sun, Gwyndolin, the moon-worshipping deity who had maintained the illusion of Anna Londo in the centuries after Gwyn's sacrifice. Pontiff Sullivan imprisoned Gwyndolin in the cathedral and offered him to Aldrich as tribute, and Aldrich devoured the god slowly, over what may have been a very long time. The evidence of this consumption is woven into the game's music. Aldrich's boss theme contains a sinister, macabre arrangement of Gwyndolин's theme from the original Dark Souls, which Gwyndolin shared with the moonlight butterfly, both creatures of the moon, woven through the composition, as though Gwyndolин's memory is still alive inside the mass that killed him. This has been noted by musicians and lore analysts across the community as a deliberate compositional choice, not a coincidence. Aldrich even borrows Gwyndolин's bow and arrow attacks during the boss fight, a spectral version of the golden arrows the deity once used. There is something deeply poetic and deeply disturbing about this. The idea that in consuming someone, you carry their echoes whether you want to or not. Aldrich's body still moves with the ghost of Gwyndolин's gestures. His soundtrack still hums with the god's theme. He is both predator and tomb. The Untended Graves is a version of the past. One of the most quietly mind-bending secrets in Dark Souls 3 is the Untended Graves, a hidden area discovered behind an illusory wall deep in the consumed King's Garden, past Okeros. When you step through, you find yourself in what appears to be a dark, torchless version of the cemetery of Ash and Firelink Shrine. The exact same areas from the very beginning of the game, but draped in shadow, stripped of warmth, inhabited by black knights and the hollow remnants of characters you thought you understood. Udex Gunda is gone. In his place stands Champion Gunda, the same figure but uncorrupted, his body not yet ravaged by the puce of man. The shrine handmaid is here, selling entirely different wares. The coiled sword fragment rests in the spot where Firelink's bonfire should be. The eyes of a firekeeper lie on a corpse behind a hidden wall, placed there specifically to be found by someone who might use them, to offer the firekeeper a vision of the world without fire. The sole description of Champion Gundyr reads that he was a champion who came late and was greeted by a shrine without fire and a bell that would not toll. The Untended Graves, most scholars of the game's lore agree, represents the past, a moment when Gundyr arrived and found nothing, when the flame had already gone out and no unkindled awaited. It is a glimpse of what happens when no one shows up to link the fire. The world simply goes dark, and the shrine handmaid sits alone in the shadow and waits. The eyes of the firekeeper reveal a forbidden vision. In the Untended Graves, hidden behind an illusory wall in the dark version of Firelink Shrine, You can find the eyes of a firekeeper, a pair of dark, shimmering eyes resting on the corpse of what Ludleth implies was the very first firekeeper. If you bring them back to your firekeeper at the normal Firelink shrine and give them to her, she describes what she sees. A world without fire, an endless expanse of darkness and cold. She says it brings her both grief and wonder. Ludleth warns you with unmistakable gravity that this is dangerous knowledge, that granting the firekeeper these eyes will give her a vision of the age's end, and that what follows will be a foul betrayal. He is speaking about the usurpation of the fire ending, in which the firekeeper extinguishes the flame entirely at your behest. The phrase foul betrayal is not casual. The whole mythology of Dark Souls is built on the link flame, on the sacrifice of lords and kings and chosen undead to keep the fire burning, to snuff it out by choice, willingly, using a dead woman's stolen eyes. That is not just an ending. It is the destruction of the only purpose the world has known for thousands of years. The firekeeper herself does not seem opposed to it. She speaks about the vision with a kind of quiet longing, as though she too has wondered what might grow in the dark. Rosaria and the Aldrich faithful are secretly allied. The Cathedral of the Deep is split between two factions that seem to have nothing to do with each other. On one side, you have the Deacons of the Deep, the corrupted clergy devoted to Aldrich, guardians of his empty chambers. On the other side, deep in the cathedral's inner recesses, you find Rosaria's bedchamber, home to Rosaria, the mother of rebirth, and the covenant named after her. Rosaria herself is a haunting figure, an enormous pale woman draped across a massive bed, her mouth sewn shut, capable only of communicating through gestures. Her covenant rewards members with pale tongues, items given to her in exchange for the ability to respite or change your appearance. But why is she here in a cathedral dedicated to the devourer of gods? The alliance becomes clearer when you look at what Rosaria's Fingers Covenant actually does. Members earn pale tongues by invading and killing blue sentinels and dark moon blades. The two covenants most actively opposed to Aldrich's faithful. Rosaria's organization is functionally running interference for Aldrich's enemies, hunting the people who would stop them. This arrangement almost certainly was not accidental. The Pontiff Sullivan, who ran both the city around the cathedral and had a hand in its devotional structure, appears to have orchestrated this alliance deliberately. Rosaria herself may have had no choice in any of it. Her missing tongue, her silenced voice, her captivity in the cathedral, none of it looks like a free arrangement. Horace the Hushed was one of Aldrich's children. Horace the Hushed accompanies Henri of Astora throughout most of their shared quest line. A silent armoured figure who never speaks, who wears heavy executioner's gear, and who walks beside Henri with the wordless devotion of someone who has pledged themselves to a cause they cannot fully explain. His armour description confirms what a casual playthrough might miss. Horace is one of only 2 children to have escaped Aldrich's clutches, the other being Henri. They were among the children Aldrich collected as his hunger grew, and somehow they managed to get out. That shared experience of having been held by something that ate people shapes the entire dynamic of their partnership. Horace never speaks, only grunts, and while the game never explicitly explains why, the title, The Hushed, carries a weight that players naturally read as a wound from whatever was done to him. He has worn executioner's armor taken from a corrupt executioner who was himself killed. The armor's cold, bulky interior, a detail his description mentions him taking a liking to, which reads as either ironic or deeply sad, depending on how you feel, about someone who survived something terrible, taking comfort in the armor of someone who did terrible things. When he eventually succumbs to hollowing at the bottom of a lake in Smoldering Lake, it carries the weight of someone finally losing the last battle they had been fighting since childhood. Henri's gender is always the opposite of yours. Henri of Astora is one of the game's most important NPC characters, essential to the usurpation of fire ending and present throughout much of the middle portion of the game's story. There is a quiet, elegant design choice embedded in how Henri works. Their gender is always the opposite of whatever gender you chose for your character at the start of the game. If you play as male, Henri is female. If you play as female, Henri is male. This is never explained in dialogue. It simply is. The reasons for this design decision open up beautifully when you understand the context of the usurpation ending, in which Henri becomes your silent spouse in a dark marriage ceremony. The opposite gender arrangement makes the ritual feel intentional and mythic, a mirror of the player character rather than a random encounter. It also deepens the tragedy of Horace's death, because killing Horace in front of Henri causes them to simply drop to their knees and give up, the questline failing entirely. The death of a companion is enough to break someone's will. Henri is not a warrior armored against grief. They are simply someone trying to finish what they started, beside someone they love, in a world that is ending. Sigurd and Jorm had a promise. The relationship between Sigurd of Katarina and Jorm the Giant is one of the most genuinely affecting storylines in a game full of tragedy. Jorm was not simply a warlord or a conqueror. He was a protector. The city of the profane capital was his charge, and he gave everything to keep it safe. When the profane flame erupted and destroyed everything he had protected, when every life in the Dostoevsky capital was lost, Jorm chose to sacrifice himself and linked the first flame as penance for his failure. Before he went, he gave his oldest friend Sigurd a weapon called the Storm Ruler, a sword specifically designed to fell giants. He asked Sigurd for a promise. If Jorm was ever resurrected against his will, ever dragged back from the peace he had earned, Sigurd would be the one to end it. When you fight Jorm the Giant and follow Sigurd's questline far enough to find him locked in a cell in Irithyll Dungeon, and then free him, he fulfills that promise. He storms the boss room, carrying his own Storm Ruler, toasts his old friend before the fight, and then they battle together. After Jorm falls, Sigurd sits beside the fading embers and drinks his Siegbräu ale alone. He says almost nothing. There is nothing left to say. He made a promise to a friend who was already dead, and he kept it. That is the entirety of his purpose in the game. It is enough. Patches the hyena appears in every Souls game. Unbreakable Patches is one of those characters that somehow makes it into every iteration of the Souls formula, wearing a slightly different name or face, but always playing the same role. The jovial, shameless, deeply dishonest scoundrel who tricks you into dangerous situations for personal gain and then laughs about it afterward. In Dark Souls 3, Patches first appears in the Cathedral of the Deep wearing Sigurd's stolen armor. He has robbed the Katarina Knight and is using the disguise to trick unsuspecting adventurers into crossing a lowered bridge before dropping them. His character model, his voice, his catchphrase about being a simple, humble servant. It's all consistent across Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, where he appears as mild-mannered Pate, Bloodborne, where he appears as Patches the Spider, and Elden Ring. What makes Patches interesting beyond the recurring joke is how he interacts with religion. He despises clerics. He distrusts the devout. Nearly every trap he sets targets people who seem pious or who he judges as greedy for holy power. He thinks the gods are taking advantage of humans, and he may not be entirely wrong. In a world where gods like Gwyn sacrificed humanity to maintain their own age of power, Patch's cynicism looks less like a character flaw and more like the only rational response. Greirat the thief dies for Loretta. Greirat of the undead settlement begins the game locked in a cell near the high wall of Lothric, and he will stay locked there until someone finds the key and frees him. When you do, he asks only one thing in return: that you find a woman named Loretta and bring him word of her. Loretta, it turns out, is already dead, her bones hanging from a post in the undead settlement below. When you bring him her remains, he grieves quietly. He thanks you, and then he does something remarkable. He gets up, joins your Firelink shrine, and starts sending himself out on scavenging missions across some of the most dangerous places in the world: Undead Settlement, Iarithil of the Boreal Valley, the Lothric Castle area, just to bring back consumables and items for you. He doesn't do it for money. He does it because Loretta asked him to be better. He was a thief, possibly a criminal, and she believed in him anyway, and he carries that belief around like armor against despair. His later scavenging missions can get him killed if you aren't careful. Patches or Sigurd have to intervene to save him in Iarithil, and in Lothric, if no one goes to his aid, he simply doesn't come back. The game never makes a big moment out of his potential death. He just isn't there anymore when you return. The Soul of Cinder is every champion who ever linked the fire. The final boss of Dark Souls 3 is the Soul of Cinder, and at first glance, it seems to be simply a large armored figure representing the culmination of the Age of Fire. That reading is not wrong, but it doesn't go nearly deep enough. The Soul of Cinder is the accumulated essence of every single person who has ever linked the first flame throughout all of the cycles that preceded the events of the game. Every chosen undead, every lord, every sacrifice that kept the fire burning across the ages. All of it folded into one entity that has been standing vigil at the kiln of the first flame for longer than most things have existed. During its second phase, the Soul of Cinder transitions into a very specific fighting style, the exact moveset of Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, the first person to link the flame in the original Dark Souls. The music shifts to a haunting arrangement of Gwyn's boss theme, one of the most recognizable melodies in gaming. It is, without question, the most direct form of fan service From Software has ever produced. But it is not gratuitous. It is a farewell. Gwyn is somewhere in that mass of ash and fire. He is the loudest voice in it, and you have to defeat him again to end the cycle, just as you did in the original game. The difference is that now you understand what you are really doing. There is a dark version of Firelink Shrine nobody can walk to. There are technically 3 versions of Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 3. The normal version, which you can only reach by fast traveling to it, serves as your hub. The Untended Graves version, which can be physically walked to through the consumed King's Garden, represents the past. And then there is the Firelink Shrine at the Kiln of the First Flame, reached by warping there with the coiled sword before the final boss. This version is destroyed and ashen, a burned out ruin of the safe space you spent the whole game returning to. None of the NPCs are there. The Shrine Handmaid is gone. The bonfire is present, but only barely. It is the version of home that exists after everything has been spent, after every quest line has resolved or failed, after every companion has lived out their purpose or their tragedy. Walking into that version of Firelink for the first time has a specific quality, a kind of finality that the game earns because it has spent 60 or 80 hours making Firelink feel safe. The Kiln version strips that safety away quietly, without announcement, before sending you through the fog gate for the last time. Yoel's dark sigils are permanent hollowing scars. Yoel of Lundor is easy to miss entirely. He appears in the undead settlement as a pilgrim, a small man huddled among a group of other hollow pilgrims, all apparently dead. If you speak with him, he offers to draw out your true strength, to give you a free level. This offer has a price that the game does not explain clearly. He brands you with a dark sigil, a mark of undeath that increases your hollowing level. Each time you draw out your strength, you gain a level and another sigil, up to 5 times. After the 5th time, Yoel dies, his purpose fulfilled, and Yuria of Lundor takes his place. The hollow ending requires holding all 5 of Yoel's sigils, plus 3 more gathered through Henri's questline, for a total of 8. What players sometimes miss is that the hollowing scars change your face. As your hollow level climbs, your character's skin darkens and cracks, their eyes dim, their features grow gaunt and strange. This is not merely cosmetic. The game is showing you what the dark sigil actually does to a body, the toll of carrying that much death in your soul. Curing the sigils through the Firekeeper costs a significant number of souls and removes the hollow marks. But it also locks you out of the dark ending. The game asks you to choose between beauty and ambition, between healing and power. Gwyndolin was fed to Aldrich alive. The fate of Dark Sun, Gwyndolin, the moon god of Anor Londo and the final hidden boss of the original Dark Souls, is among the most horrifying in all of the series. When Pontiff Sulivan seized Irithyll and Anor Londo, he did not simply kill Gwyndolin. He imprisoned the weakened deity in the abandoned cathedral, using Gwyndolin's survival as leverage to keep the god's sister Yorshka from protesting. Then he arranged for Aldrich to consume Gwyndolin, not in a single act, but slowly. An encounter in Dark Souls 3 allows players to find Aldrich in the process of the feast, with Gwyndolin's legs still visible, still thrashing, while Aldrich's amorphous body slowly absorbs the rest. The boss is fought in Anor Londo itself, in the same great cathedral where you once fought Ornstein and Smaug, and the horror of the situation is architectural as much as narrative. Standing in that beautiful golden room, watching that slow consumption, knowing what it once was. Aldrich's attacks include the golden arrow barrages associated with Gwyndolin. His slumped body incorporates the god's aesthetic. He wears Gwyndolin's suffering openly, and he moves through it with the contentment of someone utterly without remorse. The demon, race is going extinct. Among the quieter tragedies scattered throughout Dark Souls 3 is the fate of the demons. In the original game, demons were powerful, numerous, and deeply tied to the chaos flame of Izalith. By the time Dark Souls 3 takes place, the chaos flame has faded. The source of demonic life is dying, and so the demons are dying with it. In Smouldering Lake and the demon ruins below it, you find not armies of demons, but the corpses of them. Massive, ancient bodies cooling in the ash. Casualties of a slow extinction that has been happening for a long time. The old demon king, who serves as the area's boss, is described as one of the last of his kind. His weapon descriptions note that the demons' power came from their burning souls, and those souls are going cold. The item descriptions of weapons forged from demon souls acknowledge their fading lineage. What might be easy to miss is the pair of demon-related corpses hidden behind an illusory wall in the demon ruins, figures believed to be Quilana and the Fair Lady from the original game, the sisters of Chaos Witch Quelaag. If the body near Quilana's pyromancy tome is truly her, then she returned to Izalith to die alongside what remained of her family. Not all endings need to be victories. Sometimes going home to the dying is simply what love requires. The twin princes refused to link the fire out of compassion. Prince Lothric and his elder brother Lorien are among the most genuinely sympathetic characters in Dark Souls 3, though the game never makes that sympathy easy to reach. Lorien is large, scarred, and moves across the floor dragging himself, unable to walk due to a curse he willingly accepted from his brother. Lothric, the younger and weaker of the two, rides on his brother's back like a sleeping child, only rousing to cast sorcery during the boss fight. Their dynamic is one of the most tender things in the game. A strong older brother carrying a sick younger one. Both of them refusing to do what the world demands. The refusal to link the flame that drives so much of the game's plot is not, for them, cowardice or selfishness. Lothric was designated from birth to be a Lord of Cinder, a sacrifice. He grew up sick and shriveled, never strong enough even to grow out of his infant clothing. He was told his only purpose was to burn, and he said no. Lorien, whose curse came from shielding his brother from a fate he hadn't chosen, said no alongside him. The throne in Firelink Shrine still lists Lothric as a Lord of Cinder, a title assigned, not earned. The question of whether you can truly hold someone responsible for refusing the role that was forced on them from birth is one Dark Souls 3 asks and does not answer. Ludleth was a tiny man who chose to burn. Ludleth of Courland is a curious presence in Firelink Shrine, small, withered, seated permanently on his throne of ash, and perpetually cheerful in a way that carries undertones of enormous loss. Is one of the 5 Lords of Cinder, which means he voluntarily sacrificed himself to link the first flame at some point in the past. What the game eventually reveals is that Ludleth did not do this because he was a great warrior or a powerful king. He did it through sheer will. His item descriptions suggest that he willed himself to become a lord, that the act was a choice made in full knowledge of its cost, by someone who understood exactly what linking the fire meant and did it anyway. He speaks warmly. He offers to transpose boss souls for you. He calls you a good unkindled when you bring him worthy offerings. When Yuria of Londa comes to Firelink, he watches her with something like wariness. He knows what she is and what she wants. He doesn't interfere. He simply sits on his throne and waits out the end of the world with the patience of someone who has already paid the highest price once and has nothing left to fear. There is a peace in that, uncomfortable as it is. He chose his burning. Very few people in Dark Souls 3 chose anything. Gwyn statues in Analondo. Hide a secret room. In the circular room on the approach to Analondo in Dark Souls 3, the same grand chamber filled with black knight statues standing vigil around the hall's perimeter. There is a statue of Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, positioned at the room's far end. Most players walk past it without a second thought, but using the prayer gesture while facing the Gwyn statue causes it to vanish, revealing a long hidden hallway behind it. Down that passage, in a space bathed in otherworldly moonlight, you find the brass set, a suit of armor associated with the Covenant of Gwyn's Church from the original Dark Souls, and a pedestal with no explanation. The moonlit quality of the hidden room, its placement behind the image of Gwyn, and the presence of an altar without purpose suggests it was once a place of genuine religious devotion, a private sanctuary for those who worshipped the Lord of Sunlight before everything went wrong. The game does not explain it. It simply rewards those curious enough to bow before a statue and patient enough to wait for the wall to melt away. Primordial serpent statues are hidden in plain sight, scattered throughout Lothric Castle and the Grand Archives. Tucked into corners and placed among other decorative carvings are a number of unusual statues that most players would simply pass by without recognition. These statues depict long-necked, toothy creatures with serpentine bodies and hollow, open mouths, and players of the original Dark Souls will immediately recognize them as primordial serpents, the ancient snake-like beings who served as manipulators and advisors throughout the first game. Kingseeker Frampt appeared at Firelink Shrine to guide the chosen undead toward linking the fire. Darkstalker Carthy lurked in the abyss, urging the opposite, their presence in the architecture of Lothric, carved into walls, embedded in decorative friezes, watching from above doorways, suggests that the primordial serpents have had influence over the royal city for a very long time. In the Ringed City DLC, similar figures appear, but with beast-like bodies, rather than purely serpentine ones, implying an evolution or variation in the lineage. The statues never speak. They never move. They are simply there, watching, as they have always been. A presence in the background of a world that does not fully acknowledge what guides it. The Grand Archives scholars dip their heads in wax to read. Cursed books. The Grand Archives of Lothric are filled with scholars. Academics in robes who carry candles and shuffle through the stacks with an air of distracted, dangerous expertise. What makes the scholar enemies unusual, and what most players find strange the first time they encounter them, is that some of them appear to have their heads dipped in or coated with wax. This is not aesthetic strangeness or random monster design. It is practical necessity. The books housed in the Grand Archives are cursed. Reading them without protection exposes the reader's mind directly to the curse's effect, which would kill an ordinary person. The scholars have found a workaround. By submerging their heads in the pools of melted wax located throughout the archives, they create a physical barrier between the text's malevolence and their vulnerable minds. The same mechanic is available to you as a player. Stepping into the wax pools and covering your head allows you to read the cursed text without taking damage or accumulating curse buildup. This is the kind of environmental storytelling Dark Souls does at its most elegant. The mechanics of enemy behavior and the mechanics of player defense are the same, for the same reason, because the world follows consistent internal rules even when those rules are bizarre. Blackhand Gotthard was killed for desertion. The Grand Archives can only be entered after obtaining the Grand Archives key, which is found on the corpse of a Blackhand NPC slumped near the entrance. This is Blackhand Gotthard, one of the 3 Blackhand agents who appear at the top of the archives. All of them immediately hostile to the player. The puzzle of why they attack you and what happened to Gotthard lies in the circumstantial evidence. The Black Hands are elite agents of the throne, assassins and enforcers dispatched for the crown's most sensitive tasks. Gotthard's corpse near the entrance and the presence of the other 2 Black Hands still active inside suggest that Gotthard attempted to leave, to abandon his post, or perhaps to flee what was unfolding inside the archives, and was intercepted and killed by his former colleagues. The nature of what made him run and what the remaining Black Hands are protecting or doing inside the archives is left deliberately unclear. What is clear is that the Black Hand organization does not permit desertion, and that whatever Gotthard saw or decided inside that building was enough to make him try. It was not enough to make him succeed. Irithel's dogs have almost human faces. In Irithel of the Boreal Valley, among the various enemies patrolling the moonlit streets, you will encounter large dogs, fast-moving, aggressive hounds that can quickly overwhelm careless players. A detail that is easy to miss in the chaos of combat is that these dogs have faces that are distinctly, uncannily, almost human. Their skulls are shaped like human skulls. Their features are wrong in the way that faces in nightmares are wrong, familiar and not. The implication, when combined with what you know about Pontiff Sullivan, is deeply disturbing. The Pontiff spent his tenure in Irithel running extensive experiments on its people. He gave his Outrider knights rings that transformed them into feral beasts. He introduced the citizens of the city to the profane flame, which is scholars' clothing. Descriptions say consumed their hearts. The near-human faces of the Irithel dogs strongly suggest that these animals were not always animals, that Sullivan's experiments found their worst expressions in what used to be people, and that the city's streets are haunted not only by hollows, but by something that was once human and is no longer. Archdeacon MacDonald is dead by Sullivan's order. Despite appearing to operate in the service of Aldrich, Pontiff Sullivan maintained his own interests at all times, interests that frequently conflicted with those of the people around him. One of the clearest demonstrations of this is the fate of Archdeacon MacDonald, the head of the Aldrich Faithful Covenant. MacDonald's body can be found in the water reserve area of the game, and guarding his corpse are two of Sullivan's beasts, the Pontiff's personal transformed servants. These are not random enemies that wandered to the location. They are guards standing post over a specific body. The most natural reading is that Sullivan had MacDonald killed and stationed guardians over him to ensure no one could investigate or move the body. Why? MacDonald ran the Aldrich Faithful, which was the covenant most directly dedicated to serving Aldrich's hunger. Sullivan, who was using Aldrich as a tool for his own power consolidation, likely wanted to maintain control over the Covenant's operations, rather than allowing its head to run it independently. Killing the head and installing his own beasts as guards over the evidence suggests a coup of the internal structure of Aldrich's church. Subtle enough to avoid open conflict, decisive enough to remove any threat. Sister Frida was once a painting guardian. The central antagonist of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, Sister Frida, presents herself as a protector of the painted world, a caretaker who wants only for the painting to rot peacefully, for the world within it to quietly die without interference. Her truth is more complex. Item descriptions establish that Frida was originally a painting guardian, one of the silent, quick-moving protectors who defended the original painted world of Ariamis in Dark Souls 1. At some point, she left. She abandoned the painted world and became a Sable Church member in the company of Uria of Lundor. Later, she returned to the painted world, not the original, but the new one of Ariandel, and took up the role of its protector again. But she did not return to serve the world. She returned because she wanted it to die. She actively prevented any flames from being lit within the painting, because a burning painting would require a new one to be created, and she did not want the cycle to continue. Her desire is not protection, it is mercy killing. She wants the world to simply end quietly. Father Ariandel, chained and penitent in the painting's depths, wants to light the flame. Frida wants to smother it. Their conflict is the DLC's heart, and neither of them is simply wrong. Slave Knight Gale spent ages searching for the Dark Soul. Slave Knight Gale serves as a guide and recurring presence in both Dark Souls 3 DLCs and his story is one of the most singular in the entire series. Gale is an old, scarred slave knight, one of a class of fighters used as fodder in wars long past, who has undertaken an impossible mission on behalf of a painter. Find the blood of the dark soul, the source of humanity itself, so that it can be used to paint a new world when the old one finally ends. To find the dark soul, Gale must travel to the very end of the world, and that is what he does. He searches, he fights, he waits, he survives the end of the Age of Fire. He travels to the Ringed City, where the remnants of the dark soul are held in the bodies of the pygmy lords, the original inheritors of the furtive pygmy's ancient power. He consumes those diminished fragments, and the power is too much for him. When you face him in the final encounter of the Ringed City DLC, in a barren desert at the literal end of existence, he has gone mad. He is enormous. He is violent. He is surrounded by lightning and blood and the weight of everything he consumed. He wanted only to find a paintbrush's worth of pigment. The dark soul gave him the end of the world instead. Filianori's sleep kept the Ringed City frozen in time. At the very end of the Ringed City DLC, after passing through the ancient city and defeating the spears of the church, you find a woman sleeping in a chapel. Princess Filianor, the youngest daughter of Gwyn. The small envoy banner reveals the circumstances of her placement there. When Gwyn gave the Ringed City to the Pygmy Lords after the war against the dragons, he also gave them his youngest daughter as a symbolic gift, promising to come for her someday. He never came. Filianor fell asleep holding a shattered egg, and in doing so created a kind of temporal bubble around the Ringed City, a barrier that kept the effects of the fading first flame from reaching the city, preserving it in a state of arrested time. The spears of the church were founded specifically to protect her sleep and maintain this preservation. When you touch the broken egg, she cradles and wake her. The temporal barrier shatters. Time catches up. The Ringed City collapses into its true state. A desert ruin at the end of everything already long dead. Gale waiting in the ash with the dark soul and his broken mind. Gwyn's promise to his youngest daughter was always a lie. He gave her to the Pygmies as a political tool, and she slept alone in a church at World's End, while the fire she was meant to outlast finally burned out. The Dreg Heap contains ruins. From across all of history, the Dreg Heap, the starting area of the Ringed City DLC, is described in the game's lore as the place where everything ends up when the world begins to collapse inward at the conclusion of the Age of Fire. As the flame fades and reality, phrase, the detritus of history falls toward the world's end, compressing layers of time into a single geographical space. Walking through the Dreg Heap means walking through overlapping fragments of the game's entire history. Ruins from Earthen Peak in Dark Souls 2 are embedded in the walls, recognizable to players of the second game by their distinctive architecture. Structures from multiple eras sit stacked on top of each other like geological strata. It is, in the most literal sense, the end of the world functioning as a landfill for everything that ever existed. The enemies here reflect this layering. Creatures from different times and places, all drawn or fallen into the same accumulating debris. There is something philosophically interesting in what From Software chose for the series' final geography. Not a grand final battle, not a throne room or a divine summit, but a junk heap. Everything ends up in the same pile eventually, regardless of how magnificent it was at the height of its time. The Rosaria's Fingers Covenant has a body horror limit. Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth, allows members of her covenant to remake themselves. to respect their stats, alter their appearance, change who they are. Members of Rosaria's Fingers can do this multiple times using pale tongues as currency. What the game mentions quietly, almost as an aside, is that this transformation has a limit. After 5 times, the description suggests, the body cannot sustain further rebirth. The person becomes something else, no longer human in any meaningful sense, reduced to a crawling, mewling thing incapable of coherent thought or action. This limit is echoed thematically in the Ringed City's Dreg Heap, where the world itself seems to have undergone too many rebirths and can no longer hold together. The argument being that the pattern of death and renewal the entire Dark Souls series is built upon may have its own version of the 5 transformation limit. How many times can a world be reborn before it stops being a world? The Dreg Heap is the answer. It is what accumulates when the answer is finally given. Okiros killed his own invisible child. Osiros, the Consumed King, is one of the most disturbing boss encounters in Dark Souls 3, and not entirely for the reasons that are obvious. The former king of Lothric, consumed by his obsession with dragons and the works of Saith the Scaleless, descended into madness. He is first encountered in a ruined garden beneath Lothric Castle, and the most immediately strange thing about him is what he appears to be holding. Nothing. He cradles an invisible something in one arm throughout the first half of the fight, speaking tenderly to it, calling it Okelotta, his child of dragons. During this phase, you can actually hear a baby crying if you listen carefully. Faint, high, real. Okeros asks Ocelot to come out, seemingly not realizing the child is no longer there. Then he loses his composure entirely and transitions to a feral second phase, during which it is strongly implied that he kills the child in the act of going berserk. In the alpha version of the game, Ocelot had a visible model, a small, dark, malformed infant with a flower-like dragon scale covering. The model was made invisible for the final release, almost certainly to soften the moment when Okeros slams the child against the ground. The baby's cry was cut from the transition. The horror is still there. It is simply made to be inferred rather than witnessed directly. From Software thought the visible version was too much. That tells you something about what the invisible version still contains. Orbeck of Vinheim will disappear if you don't act quickly. Orbeck of Vinheim is the primary sorcery merchant for spells in Dark Souls 3, and he is one of the most easily lost NPCs in the game through no fault of your own. When you first encounter him on the Road of Sacrifices, he refuses to speak to you unless you have at least 10 points in intelligence. He finds talking to the unintelligent a waste of his considerable scholarly time. Once he does agree to join your Firelink Shrine, you enter a narrow window. If you reach the Abyss Watcher's boss without having given Orbeck at least one scroll from the game's various sorcery tome pickups, he decides you have no future as a sorcerer and leaves, taking his entire inventory with him. He will not return. The game never announces this. There is no warning. He simply goes, and if you are on Uria's quest line and need him for a specific item, his disappearance locks you out of an achievement, a gesture, and a ring. Orbeck is a proud private man who has staked everything on the pursuit of knowledge in a world where knowledge is increasingly beside the point, and the game respects his autonomy enough to let him leave when he sees no reason to stay. That respect is not convenient for the player. It is, however, entirely consistent with who he is. The 3 endings represent 3 different philosophies. Dark Souls 3 offers 4 endings, but 3 of them speak to distinct philosophical positions on the nature of the cycle the world has been trapped in. The first ending, linking the flame, is the default. You sacrifice yourself to extend the age of fire, as countless people before you have done, and the cycle continues. The description calls it the end of fire ending when done with the firekeeper's eyes involved, but in the standard version, it is simply perpetuation. The second ending involves letting the firekeeper claim the flame for herself, extinguishing it, and allowing the age of dark to begin, the world finally cooling and entering a new phase. This ending is quiet, calm, and genuinely ambiguous about whether it is good or simply different. The third ending, the usurpation of fire, is Kati's ending, the dark marriage ending, where you claim the flame as the Lord of Hollows and rule over an age of dark that is specifically human rather than godless. Each ending frames the central question of the whole series differently. Linking the Flame asks, is continuation worth the cost? The Firekeeper ending asks, is ending always death, or can darkness be peace? The Usurpation asks, if the age of gods is over, what comes next, and who has the right to decide? Dark Souls 3 doesn't answer. It just makes you walk into the fire and choose. Yoshka was trapped in a tower by the Pontiff. Company Captain Yoshka, leader of the Blades of the Dark Moon Covenant, lives at the top of a tower in Irithil of the Boreal Valley that can only be reached by crossing an invisible bridge hidden from sight. She has been there for a long time. She does not know why she cannot leave. The circumstances of her imprisonment, as pieced together from item descriptions and the Pontiff's history, tell a grim story. Yoshka is the sister of Gwyndolin, a crossbreed like him, with a dragon's tail and enough divine heritage to be recognized as someone who mattered. When Pontiff Sullivan seized Anor Londo and imprisoned Gwyndolin, he trapped Yoshka in her tower as well, using her as leverage to ensure Gwyndolin's compliance. As long as she lived, Gwyndolin would not resist. As long as Gwyndolin did not resist, the transfer of divine legitimacy went smoothly. Yoshka never understood any of this. She's been in her tower, worshipping the moon, maintaining the blades of the Dark Moon Covenant, waiting for the brother she cannot find. She asks you if you have seen him. He has been dead inside Aldrich for longer than she realizes. She does not know. The game never makes you tell her. Hawkwood left Firelink Shrine to find the path of the dragon. Hawkwood the Deserter is the Hollow Knight, who sits at the bonfire in Firelink Shrine when you first arrive. The first character you can actually speak with, and he plays a recurring role throughout the game as a foil and eventual adversary. He abandoned the Abyss Watchers, earned the title Deserter, and now spends his time in the shrine, jaded and contemptuous of heroism. His full quest line, which many players never complete, ends in a duel. Hawkwood grows increasingly drawn toward the path of the dragon, the ancient covenant that was originally tied to the Nameless King and the worshippers at Archdragon Peak. He eventually challenges you directly, wanting the Dragon Torso Stone to complete his transformation. The questline culminates in the discovery that Hawkwood's desertion from the Abyss Watchers was not cowardice but disillusionment. He believed in something, it broke, and now he is searching for a different belief. The path of the dragon is, in his eyes, older and truer than the god wars that made everyone around him miserable. He is not wrong in his analysis, even if his methods leave something to be desired. His questline ends with a duel. Whether you win or lose, his search is over. The profaned flame cannot be extinguished. In the lore of Dark Souls 3, most fires can be fed or allowed to go out. The first flame flickers toward extinction with every cycle, requiring fresh sacrifices to maintain its heat. Even the chaos flame of Izalith, which burned at the heart of the demon ruins for millennia, eventually faded and took its demons with it. But the profaned flame, which burns beneath the profaned capital, and which Sullivan discovered in his youth, cannot be put out. It burns without sustenance. It does not need kindling. The descriptions of equipment associated with the profane flame describe it as a blasphemous fire, one that exists outside the natural order of the world's relationship with heat and light. When it erupted in the profane capital, it killed everyone and everything there. Yorm the giant, who had devoted his life to protecting that city, was helpless against it. The profane flame did not care. It simply burned. This quality, the undying fire that cannot be reasoned with, fed, or extinguished, gives Sullivan a kind of cosmic leverage that other characters lack. He found a fire that the world's rules didn't apply to, and he used it to make himself unkillable by ordinary political means. A flame that won't go out is not a fire. It is a threat without a deadline. The Crystal Sages were apprentices of Big Hat Logan. The Crystal Sages encountered in the Road of Sacrifices and the Grand Archives are unusual among Dark Souls 3's bosses, in that their lore connects them explicitly to a figure from the original game. Big Hat Logan was a legendary sorcerer from Dark Souls 1, who pushed the limits of crystal sorcery further than anyone had before him, ultimately driving himself mad in the Duke's archives through his obsession with Saith the Scaleless. The Crystal Sages are described as his apprentices. They carried his pursuit of crystal sorcery into a new age, bringing it to Lothric and establishing themselves in the Grand Archives. Their crystalline blue appearance, their teleportation, their focus on sorcery as research, all of it traces to Logan's legacy. They are, in the most literal sense, what enthusiasm for an idea looks like 2 generations removed from the original thinker. Technically proficient, personally distant, more concerned with the continuation of the work than with understanding why the work was started. Logan went mad. His apprentices seem not to have, or at least not in the same direction. Whether that is growth or simply a different madness is unclear from the item descriptions alone. The Abyss Watchers carry Artorias' legacy. The Abyss Watchers are the Lords of Cinder, who link their fate to one of the most beloved figures in the entire Soul series, Knight Artorias of the Abyss from Dark Souls 1. They are the Undead Legion of Farron, a group of warriors who adopted Artorias' techniques, his style, and explicitly his mission of hunting the Abyss wherever it spreads. Their leader wears a wolf-like motif. Their rolling, acrobatic combat style is recognizably derived from Artorias' moveset. Their base of operations, Farron Keep, is built around a poisonous swamp that echoes the polluted environments Artorias once navigated. The Abyss Watchers took a legend and turned him into an institution, and the tragedy is what that turned them into. They are so thoroughly devoted to the idea of hunting the Abyss that they have lost the ability to tell each other from the thing they hunt. During the boss fight, multiple Abyss Watchers fight each other, unable to distinguish the Abyss within themselves from the enemy outside. Their devotion became corruption. Their mission ate them. It is one of the most quietly devastating comments on the nature of zealotry that Dark Souls has ever made. And it is made almost entirely through combat and architecture, almost entirely without words. Hawkwood's shield stays in Firelink when he leaves. When Hawkwood the deserter eventually abandons Firelink Shrine to pursue the path of the dragon, he leaves something behind. his shield. It does not disappear into his inventory. It stays resting against Andre's forge, visible in the shrine even after its owner is gone. This is a small detail, easily missed if you are not paying close attention to the area's geometry, but it carries a specific weight. The shield is a defensive item. Leaving it behind when you depart for a path defined by transformation and risk is a statement. Hawkwood has decided he no longer needs protection. He has decided that whatever comes next, he will meet it without a shield between himself and the impact. Whether that is courage or recklessness depends entirely on how you read his character. Whether his desertion and his search have made him more whole or less. The shield on the floor says he has made his decision. It does not say whether the decision was wise. Irina of Karim becomes a firekeeper. If saved, Irina of Karim is found imprisoned in the undead settlement, huddled in the dark behind a locked door, and the story of what can happen to her afterward is entirely contingent on the choices you make. If you give her the Braille divine tomes that contain dark miracles, the ones that teach the most corrupt and destructive forms of holy power, she begins to be consumed by them. The miracles take hold of her, and if you are not careful about which tomes you give her, she eventually transforms into a finger maiden, a servant of the Lunder Hollow faction, her potential innocence traded for a role she never agreed to. But if you are careful, if you give her only the acceptable tomes or none at all, and if you complete Igon's questline correctly, Irina eventually finds her way to Firelink Shrine and becomes a firekeeper. Not metaphorically, literally. She takes a position at the bonfire and can be found sitting nearby, having apparently found the role she was always meant to fill. The transition is quiet, unannounced, and deeply moving if you understand what she came from. She began the game locked in a dark room, speaking through a peephole, reaching for any kindness offered. She ends it tending a fire. The curse-rotted Greatwood was made sick by its people. The curse-rotted Greatwood, the optional boss of the undead settlement, is a massive, grotesque tree that has been transformed into a horrifying mass of tumors, pale sacs, and writhing vegetation. The story behind its state is deeply sad. The undead settlement was a place where hollow and cursed people gathered, people burdened with afflictions and diseases and the marks of undeath. The settlers had a tradition. They would bestow their ailments onto the spirit tree that grew at the base of the settlement, using it as a receptacle for their suffering. Each blessing they gave it was a curse. Each prayer they sent it was another illness. Over years and decades and possibly centuries of this, the tree absorbed so many ailments that it could no longer maintain any recognizable form. It became the curse-rotted Greatwood, the embodiment of every sickness the settlement ever produced. The irony is that the people who did this were not malicious. They were simply afraid of their own suffering and looking for somewhere to put it. The tree was willing. The tree is still willing, in whatever form willingness means for something that has been made into a monster by too much received compassion. Aldrich was canonized as a saint despite being a cannibal. The Church of the Deep and the Way of White are among the most powerful religious institutions in the world of Dark Souls 3, and their relationship to Aldrich reveals something deeply troubling about how institutional religion functions in this world. Aldrich was not a secret cannibal, a hidden monster, someone who disguised his nature to gain power. He ate people openly, and the Church found it acceptable. They canonized him. They built a cathedral around his hunger. They called the consumption of flesh and the absorption of other people's lives a form of devotion. The description of the deep is deliberately murky. the deep sea associated with the abyss, with humanity in its most concentrated and dark form. But the mechanism of the Church's acceptance of Aldrich is clear enough. He was powerful. His power grew with every person he consumed. Power, in a world defined by soul strength and the political arrangements that protect it, is its own justification. The Church saw a being who grew stronger by eating the weak, and decided this was a miracle worth organizing around. This is, the game implies, not a deviation from how institutions work. It is simply a case where the usual logic is unusually transparent. The Moundmaker's Covenant worships an insane holy knight. The Moundmaker's Covenant is one of the stranger factions in Dark Souls 3, and accessing it is deliberately confusing. The most unusual route to joining it involves finding an NPC in the undead settlement who carries a large wooden cage on his back, a person dressed in hollowed rags who does not immediately attack you. If you choose to get into the cage, this man carries you willingly across the settlement and deposits you in a pit far below. At the bottom of that pit is Holy Knight Hodrick, who will attack you on sight and through whose defeat the Covenant can be earned. Hodrick is, as later questlines reveal, the grandfather of Cirrus of the Sunless Realms. He was a devout and accomplished knight who was driven mad by his time in the undead settlement, his sanity consumed by grief or loss or something the game does not fully specify. He joined the Moundmakers not out of philosophy, but out of the fragmentation of a once sharp mind. Cirrus's entire questline is built around her awareness that her grandfather is gone, not dead, but unreachable, and that the only mercy left to give him is the one she is honor-bound to provide, herself. The Dragon Slayer armor has no owner inside. The Dragon Slayer armor encountered as a boss in Lothric Castle is, in a very direct sense, not a person. The suit of armor is massive, antiquated, and moves with the mechanical determination of something that has been enchanted to continue performing its function long after its original purpose was exhausted. The description connects the armor loosely to Dragon Slayer Ornstein, the legendary Knight of Gwyn from the original Dark Souls. But the connection is one of aesthetic resemblance rather than confirmed identity. Ornstein left Anor Londo after the events of the first game, apparently in search of the Nameless King, who had trained him. Whether this armor is his, possessed by something else, or simply a suit of enchanted metal animated by the residual drive of a Dragon Slayer's purpose, is genuinely uncertain. What is clear is that nothing is inside it. The hollow plates move and strike and defend with perfect coordination, not because a person commands them, but because their function has outlasted their owner. It is a piece of martial equipment so thoroughly imbued with purpose that it has become, in the absence of a knight to wear it, the knight itself. You can start the Dancer boss fight early by killing Emma. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley is intended to be encountered much later in the game. Only after you have defeated 3 of the 4 Lords of Cinder does Emma, the High Priestess of Lothric Castle, call you to the cathedral for the confrontation. This is the intended sequence. Emma summons you, gives you the Basin of Vows. You approach the altar, the fight begins. But Emma can be killed. She can be killed the moment you find her in the High Wall of Lothric, which is to say, in the very first area of the game. Killing her immediately drops the Basin of Vows, and walking up to the altar at the altar behind her in the same room triggers the Dancer fight instantly. The Dancer at that point in the game is, for almost every player, far beyond manageable. She is a late game boss, calibrated for a character that has spent 40 or 60 hours growing. Most players who attempt this early kill die repeatedly, and learn nothing except that Vort's great club hits hard enough to potentially stagger her. The option exists, however, as a concession to the game's philosophy. It is your journey. Emma is not immortal. The gatekeeping is a suggestion. What the world does in response to your choices is simply what the world does. The Irital Dungeon cells hold lore about the church. The Irital Dungeon, one of the most oppressive and miserable areas in the game, is a deep catacomb of prison cells staffed by jailers, elongated, lantern-carrying creatures who can reduce your maximum health simply by looking at you. The prisoners in the cells are an assortment of hollows, giants, and things that have been there long enough to lose their shape entirely. Scattered throughout the dungeon are items that, when read, reveal the history of the church's treatment of those it deemed heretical or threatening. The giant in the dungeon, reaching through the bars of his cell, harmless if you do not provoke him, is connected to the giant archer in the undead settlement, and his item drops relate to that connection. The items dropped or found in various cells describe the fates of people who failed covenants, pursued forbidden knowledge, or simply ended up on the wrong side of the church's institutional memory. The dungeon is not a random geography of suffering. It is an archive. Every cell with an item is a case file. The Irital Dungeon holds the church's secrets the same way the Grand Archives holds its books. In the silence between the shelves, in the details that accumulate if you take the time to read. Cornyx of the Great Swamp was imprisoned for his pyromancy. Cornyx of the Great Swamp, the primary pyromancy merchant in Dark Souls 3, Isilito Meiti Teki, found imprisoned in a wooden cage suspended over a drop in the undead settlement, the same area where you find the mound maker's cage carrier. He was put there not because of any crime, but because of what he knows. Cornyx is a practitioner of the Great Swamp's ancient pyromancy tradition, a form of fire manipulation that has nothing to do with the Church of the Deep or the profaned flame, that predates the institutional structures currently in power. In a world where fire is not only a resource, but a theological statement, practicing the wrong kind of fire is a political act. Cornyx found himself imprisoned by people who wanted to control fire and did not appreciate anyone who had a relationship with it outside of their sanctioned channels. When you free him and he comes to Filing Shrine, he is simply grateful. He has no ambitions left except to teach. His questline ends with him receiving his own old set of equipment, found in the demon ruins near the old Demon King, and leaving behind only silence and the faint warmth of a fire that remembers what it used to be. The game connects to Dark Souls, one through the Lothric royal line. The Queen of Lothric, who is mentioned repeatedly throughout the game but never seen in person after a certain point in the timeline, is widely theorized to be Guinevere, the same Guinevere who appeared in Dark Souls 1 as the Princess of Sunlight. The evidence is compelling. The Divine Blessing item, which she is said to have blessed, shares almost identical phrasing with the same item in Dark Souls 1, where it was explicitly Guinevere's holy water. Both are associated with a goddess of fertility and bounty. The real Guinevere had long since left Anor Londo, living somewhere in the mortal world, and the timeline seems to allow for her eventual arrival at Lothric. According to item descriptions, she married King Okeros and bore him children, Lorien, Lothric, and ultimately Orkelot, before quietly disappearing after Ocelot's birth. There is a complicating factor. The Japanese text of the Divine Blessing says the queen was likened to a goddess of fertility rather than that she was one, which some argue rules out Guinevere and points to a descendant or someone merely resembling her. The debate has never been settled definitively, and From Software appears to have intended the ambiguity deliberately. What remains clear in either reading is that the Lothric royal bloodline carried something of divine weight. The fire was expected to want those princes, whatever their parentage. The fire did not care. The Farron Keep swamp surrounds a wolf god's resting place. Farron Keep is one of the game's least popular areas to navigate. A vast, toxic swamp dotted with slugs, hidden passages, and 3 fires that need to be extinguished to open the way forward. But the architecture and items buried throughout the swamp carry a quiet dignity. The keep was built around the resting place of the undead, Legion, the Abyss Watchers in their eternal vigil. Their covenant's founding was tied to Artorias, who wore the wolf ring and carried the Wolf Knight greatsword. The wolf motif pervades the entire region, from the covenant's name and aesthetic to the wolf blood that Abyss Watchers drank as part of their initiation into the Legion. The watchdogs who protect Farron Keep from outside invaders are called the Watchdogs of Farron, and their covenant is housed in a small shrine accessible via a hidden illusory wall near the ladder just past the Farron Keep bonfire. The wolf's connection to the abyss, to the knight who died containing it, and to the warriors who dedicated their existence to continuing his work makes Farron Keep not just a navigational challenge, but a graveyard for a specific idea. That the abyss can be fought, that one knight's sacrifice can inspire generations of successors, and that even a vow to protect can, given enough time and corruption, turn on itself. There is a prisoner who recognizes you in the dungeon. The Irithil dungeon contains a number of prisoners in cells, most of them too far gone to communicate, too hollow to do anything but groan or reach through bars. But one prisoner responds to you differently. The crow, Picklepea, Pumper Rum Crow, the trading crow that lives on the Firelink Shrine roof, is connected by the game's economy to the dungeon. But more specifically, there is a detail in the dungeon where what appears to be a large prisoner on the floor behind bars will, if you position yourself correctly, simply watch you. Not threaten, not attack, just watch. This is the kind of environmental detail that is easy to project meaning onto, easy to mistake for lore when it might simply be an AI behavior quirk. But in a game where every design choice is considered, in a dungeon built to reflect the history of the church's cruelty, a prisoner who only watches carries weight regardless of its technical origin. Someone in that dungeon remembers what it was to be a person. Whether that recognition translates to anything beyond stillness is a question the game leaves entirely to the player. The Lothric Knight's armor carries the kingdom's dying faith. The Lothric Knight set, one of the most visually iconic armors in the game, the white and gold plate worn by the tall, capable guards throughout Lothric Castle, carries in its item descriptions a specific sadness about the state of the kingdom it represents. The knights were trained to be the last bastion of Lothric's pride, defenders of a royal line that was expected to produce a great Lord of Cinder. They were given their armor to wear with honor, to represent a faith in the continuation of the fire that the royal family was supposed to embody. By the time you encounter them, the faith has collapsed. The kingdom is crumbling. The princes have refused. And yet the Lothric Knights are still there, still wearing their armor, still fighting with absolute precision and commitment, as if nothing has changed. They are the best argument the game makes for the tragedy of loyalty to an institution that no longer deserves it. Soldiers who are excellent at their work, defending a purpose that has already been abandoned by everyone who assigned them the mission. Slave Knight Gale calls the painting girl niece. Slave Knight Gale's relationship to the painter girl in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC is somewhat unusual for the Dark Souls universe, which rarely makes familial warmth explicit. The painter, a young woman locked in Ariandel's chapel, prevented from painting by Sister Frida, refers to Gale as uncle, not in a distant titular sense, but with genuine affection, with the kind of comfortable familiarity that suggests he has been around her for a long time. Gale is doing all of this, the entire journey to the end of the world, the consumption of pygmy lords, the descent into madness. So that she can have the dark blood, she needs to paint a new world. The dark soul, in its purest form, is what gives color to a painted world. Without it, she can only sketch outlines. With it, she can create something that lives. He goes to the furthest place anything can go, so that a child who calls him uncle can paint. There is no political agenda in that, no religious imperative, just a very old man who decided that a girl deserving of a new world was reason enough to end himself in order to find her the pigment. Andre the blacksmith never dies, even if you kill him. Andre of Astora is the blacksmith in Firelink Shrine, the same Andre who appeared in the original Dark Souls, still at his forge, still hammering, still willing to upgrade your weapons in exchange for Titanite and his own quiet patience. In Dark Souls 3, if you kill him, which you can, because Dark Souls allows you to attack anyone, he dies. He slumps. His body stays on the floor. And then, when you reload the area or return after resting at a bonfire, he is back, at his forge, hammering. Exactly as before. His shop remains accessible. He expresses no particular feelings about the fact that you murdered him. He does not warn you or threaten you. He simply continues being a blacksmith. This is true of a handful of key NPCs in Firelink Shrine. The Firekeeper, the Shrine Handmaid, Ludleth, suggesting that these figures occupy some special category of existence, bound to their roles in the shrine regardless of physical death. Andre, in particular, has appeared across the entire Dark Souls series in one form or another, always at a forge, always available to improve your weapons. His persistence might be interpreted as loyalty, or as obsession, or as the simple, relentless stubbornness of someone who has been a blacksmith since before living gods walked the earth, and will remain one long after they are all forgotten. The dancer's swords mirror Sullivan's blades by design. The description of the dancer's enchanted sword specifies that the twin weapons are symbolic of the dancer's vows, and that they are enchanted with dark magic on the right and fire on the left, as a deliberate mirror of Pontiff Sullivan's own swords. This is not coincidence. Sullivan wields the profaned greatsword in his right hand, fire, and the greatsword of judgment in his left, magic. The dancer's blades invert this, with dark on the right and fire on the left, creating a visual and mechanical echo between the enslaved outrider knight and the tyrant who enslaved her. Every swing the dancer makes in her boss fight is, in this framing, a reminder of who made her into what she is. The weapons she carries are not her own weapons. They are a symbol of the oath she was forced to make, given to her not as tools for self-expression, but as markers of subjugation, as proof of ownership, as the pontiff's aesthetic stamped onto her hands. She fights beautifully, with a grace that the game's motion capture team evidently went to great lengths to realize. That beauty was not given to her for her sake. It was given to her to make her a more impressive servant. There is something deeply melancholy in that, and something worth noticing. The Ringed Knights were created as the city's original defenders. The ringed knights who patrol the Ringed City DLC are enormous armoured figures with burning weapons, one of the most impressive enemy designs in the entire game. Their armour is fused to their bodies, grown into their skin over time. They carry paired greatswords or spear and shield configurations, and they hit with a deliberate, powerful weight that makes navigating the city a carefully measured experience. Their origin is tied to the city's founding. The Ringed City was given to the Pygmy Lords by Gwyn after the war against the dragons, and the Ringed Knights were established as its protectors. Ancient warriors who had fought in the Dragon Wars and were now tasked with guarding the inheritors of the Dark Soul. Over the ages, they stood their post. The fusing of armour to body reflects the permanence of their commitment. They have been standing in those walls long enough that the distinction between the knight and the armour became meaningless. They are the walls now, as much as the stone. When you fight through them to reach Filianor, you are essentially fighting through the last remnants of a security system that was installed at the founding of the human race and never updated once. Yuria of Londor tells you what she wants with stunning honesty. Yuria of Londor is one of the more openly antagonistic NPCs in Dark Souls 3, a darkly beautiful merchant who arrives at Firelink Shrine after Yol dies, speaks to you in careful, measured sentences about your destiny as the Lord of Hollows, and steers everything she says toward getting you to Sherp, the first flame. She is not subtle. She is not pretending to be your friend. She frames herself as a teacher, a guide, a servant of the path, but she is consistently clear that her agenda is for you to follow the usurpation ending. She is serving Carter's agenda. She is aware of this. She does not hide it. What is notable about Yuria is that in a game full of characters who dissemble and mislead, her transparency is almost unique. She tells you what she wants and why. She helps you achieve it. And if you choose not to, she leaves. No punishment. No dramatic betrayal. If you kill her, she addresses her last words to Karthi rather than to you, as though you were always incidental. You were not the point. The ending was the point. You were the mechanism. She is honest about that in a way that most people who are using you tend not to be. The four Lords of Cinder. Each represent a different failure. The four Lords of Cinder, who must be returned to their thrones before you can face the final boss. The Abyss Watchers, Aldrich, Yorm, and the Twin Princes. Each represent a distinct way of failing, the role of Lord of Cinder. The Abyss Watchers linked the fire, served their purpose, and were then corrupted by the very abyss they spent their lives fighting. Failure through the destruction of one's own mission. Aldrich linked the fire but devoured the act of sacrifice itself, consuming his purpose rather than fulfilling it. Failure through corruption of the self. Yom linked the fire as penance for a catastrophe he caused, sacrificing himself for a city he had already lost. Failure through inadequacy, through being unable to prevent the very thing you were meant to prevent. The Twin Princes were assigned to link the fire before they were born and refused. Failure through the simple refusal to cooperate with the system that required them to die for a cycle they did not create. None of these are straightforwardly villainous. All of them represent the ways that systems designed to use people eventually fail, when people stop cooperating with being used. The Old Wolf of Farron is an ancient guardian spirit. At the top of the lift in Farron Keep, accessible via a hidden illusory wall near the area's central staircase, there is a large bonfire surrounded by wolf imagery, wolf shields, wolf armor, scattered items, and at its center, an enormous old wolf who serves as the physical representation of the watchdogs of Farron Covenant. The wolf is not named. It does not speak. You simply approach it, make a gesture of offering, and it acknowledges your membership. But the presence of the wolf in this role, as the embodiment of the covenant dedicated to protecting the resting place of the Abyss Watchers, who themselves carried Artorias' Wolf Knight legacy, creates a quiet continuity across the entire series. The wolf that Artorias bonded with was Sif, one of the most emotionally resonant boss encounters in Dark Souls 1. The Undead Legion drank wolf blood as an initiation rite. The old wolf is old enough that the question of its origin, whether it is connected to Sif, whether it is a descendant or a memory or something else entirely, goes unanswered. It is simply there, where it has apparently always been, offering covenant membership to those who know to look for it. Londor is a nation built from hollow pilgrims. Londor, the kingdom that Yol and Yuria represent, is never shown directly in the game. It is not an area you can travel to. It exists only in description and in the items associated with its denizens. The pale, hollow-marked pilgrims of Londor who shuffle through the undead settlement in small groups, and the dark teachings of the Sable Church that Yuria represents. What item descriptions establish about Londor is that it is a nation built from and for the hollow, a place where undeath is not a curse to be cured, but a condition to be embraced and organized around. The hollowing that Gwyn's curse imposes on humans, the gradual loss of self and memory and identity that most of the game's setting treats as tragedy, Londor treats as the natural state of humanity without the gods' interference. The dark sigils that Yol gives you are not invitations to suffer. They are, in Londor's theology, marks of authenticity. Every scar on your hollow face is proof that you are becoming what humans were always meant to be, without divine manipulation. Whether that theology is correct is a question the usurpation of fire ending leaves very open. An age without fire and without gods is something Dark Souls 3 stops just short of showing you. The Firekeeper can die but always returns. The Firekeeper in Fireling Shrine is the quiet heart of the game's emotional architecture. A soft-spoken, blind woman who heals your Estus, who levels you up, who speaks about fire and darkness and the cycle with a kind of gentle wisdom that gradually deepens into something more complex. She can be killed. Any NPC in Firelink Shrine can be killed. When you kill her, she dies, and her body lies on the floor. Then you rest at a bonfire, or reload the area, and she is back, standing at her post, willing to level you up again. She even says, if you speak to her in certain conditions, that she cannot die, that her life is bound to the maintenance of the bonfire in a way that ordinary life is not. This permanence is not presented as a gift. The shrine handmaid in the untended graves warns visitors not to stay too long, or the curse will take them the way it took that girl. A reference, most believe, to the Firekeeper, whose immortality is itself a kind of imprisonment. She cannot leave, she cannot age, she cannot rest. She is the fire's attendant whether she chose that role or not, and the fire will keep burning as long as she attends it, and she will keep attending it as long as the fire burns, and neither of them can decide to stop. The Coiled Sword is what began your journey. When you first reach the Cemetery of Ash at the very beginning of Dark Souls 3, and defeat Udex, Gundir, the reward you pull from his chest, the item that allows you to kindle Firelink Shrine and begin your journey, is called the Coiled Sword. Its description is brief. It is a coiled sword that served as a bonfire's kindling. In the untended graves, you can find the Coiled Sword fragment in the dark version of Firelink Shrine's bonfire space, with a description noting it served its purpose long ago. The relationship between these two items suggests that the sword has been in Gundir's body for a very long time, that the process which ended with you pulling it out and kindling the shrine began at some point in the distant past, when Gundir arrived too late and was impaled with it as the only available recourse. You did not begin your journey by arriving at the cemetery of Ash. Your journey began when whoever drove that sword into Gundir decided that the cycle would continue one more time, that another unkindled would eventually come, that someone would eventually be worthy of pulling it free. You did not choose to be that person. You were simply the one who showed up. The Ringed City was built to contain humanity's power. The Ringed City was not simply a gift. The small envoy banner, one of the game's most narratively dense item descriptions, reveals the terms of the arrangement when Gwyn gave the city to the Pygmy Lords after defeating the dragons. The Pygmies carried the Dark Soul, the original source of humanity's power, something Gwyn feared and wanted contained. Rather than trying to destroy it, which the game implies may not be possible, Gwyn built them a beautiful cage. He gave them a magnificent city at the edge of the world, isolated from everything else, and installed his own daughter as a symbolic hostess and de facto jailer. The grass crest motif found throughout the city, associated with the Cloranthi ring and with Filianore, represents the gods' support for rapid civilizational development. Essentially, they gave the Pygmies the tools to build something so elaborate and comfortable that they would never want to leave. The inscription near the entrance to the city implies that it is a place people go to but rarely depart. Gwyn did not chain the Pygmies. He gave them a world and made it nicer than anywhere else, and waited for them to never look up and notice the walls. The Wolf Knight Greatsword still carries Artorias' will. One of the most sought-after weapons in Dark Souls 3, the Wolf Knight Greatsword is obtained by transposing the soul of the blood of the wolf, the soul dropped by the Abyss Watchers, the lords whose entire covenant was built around Artorias' legacy. The weapon's description says it is the choice of a great champion, strengthened by the link to the Abyss, and that wielding it makes the Guardian of the Abyss take physical form. It is, in the game's mechanical framing, a piece of Artorias himself, his will condensed into steel and carried forward by everyone who took up his mission. The Undead Legion drank wolf blood specifically to absorb something of Artorias' nature, and this weapon is the concentrated form of everything that ritual was reaching toward. In the boss fight, the Abyss Watchers use the very moves associated with Artorias in Dark Souls 1's DLC, the same rolling attacks, the same plunging strikes, the same left arm injury pose when one of them is wounded. Their bodies became so thoroughly shaped by Artorias' ghost that, in fighting them, you are fighting him again, through layers of time and devotion. Picklepea the Crow has a name. Across all the games, the trading crow found on the roof of Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 3, accessible by purchasing the tower key from the shrine handmaid or by using the bent tree near the shrine as a launch pad, is named Picklepea Pumparum. This specific name is unique to Dark Souls 3, but the concept of a crow trader on a roof is present in every game in the series. Dark Souls 1 has Snuggly the Crow. Bloodborne has its own crow merchant in a similar elevated position, and the pattern continues through the series. Each crow only trades specific items and only once per item per playthrough, which gives the interactions a quality of finality that most merchants lack. You can trade a firebomb for a homeward bone. You can trade a Loretta's bone for a divine blessing. The crow does not explain the terms. It simply accepts or rejects. The names of the individual crows, Picklepea, Snuggly, have a quality of being given by someone who found them endearing rather than threatening, which suggests either a game developer's personal fondness or the in-world implication that someone spent enough time with these birds to give them pet names. Neither explanation diminishes the charm. The Moonlight Greatsword returns in every Souls game. One of the most reliable through lines in the entire Dark Souls series is the Moonlight Greatsword, a pale glowing blade that appears in virtually every From Software game ever made, reaching back well before Dark Souls to King's Field, where the weapon first appeared. In Dark Souls 3, you can obtain it by transposing the soul of consumed Oxyros, the former king of Lothric, who became obsessed with Seath the Scaleless and transformed into a dragon-like creature. The Moonlight Greatsword is specifically described as connected to Seath, the first dragon to betray his own kind by becoming mortal and allying with Gwyn. Seath's soul contained the moonlight, and every Moonlight Greatsword in every game is a fragment of that same inheritance. Okiros worshipped Seath's scholarship, modelled himself on the Scaleless dragon's intellectual obsession, and in doing so, absorbed enough of Seath's essence to produce the weapon from his transposed soul. The Moonlight Greatsword is not just a recurring sword. It is a recurring argument for what happens when someone becomes so devoted to an idea that the idea starts to take physical form. The Catacombs of Carthus were a kingdom of undead warriors. Carthus, the ancient kingdom whose ruins make up the Catacombs of Carthus, is one of the game's most lore-rich locations, despite being primarily remembered by most players as the area with the rolling skullball trap and Wolner's boss fight. The Carthus kingdom was defined by martial excellence. Its warriors were described as having conquered many lands, their curved swords famous across the world for their aggressive, wide-swinging style. The Carthus blood ring and the various Carthus blade descriptions establish that their fighting style was built around speed, aggression, and accepting hits rather than preventing them. They were, in essence, a civilization that elevated the act of dying to kill into a martial philosophy. Eventually, they crossed into the wrong territory. High Lord Wolnir, their sovereign, sought to conquer the Abyss itself, to add the primordial darkness to his collection of conquered enemies. The Abyss consumed him instead. His golden bracelets, the only things he holds onto in his boss fight, were offerings from his piled victories. He spent eternity in darkness holding on to the proof of the things he had taken, unable to do anything with them, unable to let them go. The Anor Londo painting contains a trap. In the version of Anor Londo that appears in Dark Souls 3, the same cathedral city rebuilt or preserved from the original game, there is a painting on the wall of a hallway past the bonfire that serves as a classic Dark Souls trap. The painting shows a snow-covered landscape, peaceful and still. Walking up to it gives a prompt to interact. Touching it transports you inside the painting. And if you know Dark Souls 1, you recognize the snowy, grey painted world of Ariamis immediately. But in Dark Souls 3, there is no transition to a full area. You are simply dropped into the wall from which you are immediately expelled by a hidden outrider, knight, and a number of other enemies. The painting in Dark Souls 1 led to the painted world of Aramis, a fully explorable area of great beauty and danger. The painting in Dark Souls 3's Anor Londo is a reference to that experience, and also a prank. Someone in the game's design team decided that the appropriate Dark Souls 3 response to nostalgia for the painted world was an ambush. Irithyll was a city of eternal night. Irithyll of the Boreal Valley is immediately striking the moment you pass through the invisible barrier and see it spread out before you. A silver and blue city glowing under a perpetual moon, its canals frozen, its streets traced with soft reflected light, enormous and beautiful in the way that something can be beautiful and completely lifeless at the same time. The eternal night of Irithyll is not a natural meteorological phenomenon. The city was built in the Boreal Valley, which is described as a cold, isolated region, and the moon that hangs over it is specifically associated with Gwyndolin, the dark sun, whose lunar covenant maintained this quality of moonlit darkness as a condition of the city's religious aesthetic. Sullivan, who seized the city after imprisoning Gwyndolin, inherited this perpetual night without inheriting the devotion it was built to honor. The moon still shines. Gwyndolin is dead inside Aldrich. The small doll description that allows you entry to the city speaks of Irithyll as a homeland to those who were given the doll. Wherever you go, the moon still sets in Irithyll. Wherever you may be, Irithyll is your home. That warmth, encoded in a doll given to valued subjects, was Sullivan's attempt to instill loyalty. In a city of eternal night, under a borrowed moon, for a god already dead, it is the saddest promise of belonging imaginable. The crow merchant on the roof trades across the whole game. The items tradable with Pickle Pea Pumper rum on the Firelink Shrine roof include several that are exclusively obtainable through her. The porcine shield, the armor of the sunset, Solaire's armor from Dark Souls 1, including the sunlight shield, Lucatiel's mask from a Dark Souls 2 character, and all 5 carvings, which are small wooden figures that can be thrown to produce specific voice lines. The carvings are particularly interesting. They say things like, "I'm sorry," and "here," and "help me." Spare, lonely phrases that have an emotional quality far beyond their mechanical use. The fact that Solaire's armor can only be obtained from the crow, and only by trading specific items you might not realize are tradable, gives it a specific gravity. Solaire of Astora, the Sunlight Knight, who became one of the most beloved characters in the series, is not directly present in Dark Souls 3. His armor is hidden in a bird's nest on a rooftop, obtainable only through an exchange system whose logic the game never fully explains. To get it, you have to know it is there. You have to have been told. The crow is keeping it for someone who hasn't come back. Carla the Witch was imprisoned for her knowledge. Carla is one of the more obscure NPCs in Dark Souls 3, found in a locked cell in the Irithyll dungeon and requiring a specific key to reach. She is a practitioner of dark sorceries. Specifically, she knows how to teach the Deep Braille Divine Tomes, which contain the most corrupted and dangerous miracles in the game, as well as pyromancies associated with the Abyss. She was imprisoned not because she had done anything violent, but because she knew things that the authorities found threatening. Her armor description speaks of a dark witch who survived where others perished by the grace of inherited dark knowledge, the implication being that she learned dark magic from a lineage of practitioners who had already been deemed heretical, and that the institutional church found her existence itself a problem. Freeing Carla brings her to Firelink Shrine, where she sits in a corner and teaches with quiet precision and no interest in being thanked. She never explains where she comes from or what happened to her family of dark practitioners. She simply knows, and she offers to share that knowledge with anyone who provides the appropriate tomes. In a game where knowledge is distributed in cryptic parcels and libraries are cursed, a willing teacher in a corner of Firelink is not to be taken lightly. The deep accursed are something that used to be human. The deep accursed the enormous, spider-like creatures that drop from the ceiling in the Cathedral of the Deep and in the path to Archdeacon's Chamber, are among the game's most grotesque and unsettling enemy designs. They are enormous. They move with a horrible speed. Their bodies are pale and bloated, covered in the same kind of hollow human faces that the Irithil dogs carry, and their attacks include a grab that afflicts you with a cursed build-up as they bite. The Deep, as the game's lore consistently frames it, is the concentrated essence of humanity's darkness. The abyss in its most intimate form, the part of every human soul that is not light. The Deep accursed appear to be beings that were consumed so thoroughly by the Deep that they lost their human form entirely, their shape expanding and distorting into something that carries the marks of their humanity only as a horror. Those faces, those limbs, that pale imitation of flesh, stretched over something that no longer has any use for it. They are what the cathedral was always building toward. Beneath the ceremony and the canting and the organized religion, something that wanted and consumed and became shapeless through the excess of its own wanting. Hawkwood's quest line ends in a duel at the cemetery. Hawkwood, the deserter's arc in Dark Souls. 3 is one of the more melancholy character arcs in the game, partly because it never quite reaches the catharsis it seems to be building toward. Hawkwood is a man, defined by what he left behind. The Abyss Watchers, the Undead Legion. Whatever cause kept him fighting before he decided none of it was worth it. His path in the game leads him toward the Dragon Path, toward transformation, toward finding something older and less compromised than the God Wars he grew tired of. When you have progressed far enough, he challenges you to a duel at the Cemetery of Ash, the place where the game began, where Udex Gunde was impaled and waiting. The duel is for your Dragon Torso Stone, because he needs it for his transformation, and he will not simply ask. The fight is quiet and personal in a way few boss encounters are. When it is over, whether you win or lose, the game moves on. There is no dramatic conclusion, no revelation. Hawkwood chose his path. You helped him arrive at it, or stopped him on the road. Either way, the journey from the bonfire in Firelink, where he sat in tired contempt to the cemetery, where he stood and challenged you to fight. For what he wanted is a complete story, even without a tidy ending. Vort was sent to Lothric as a guard who became a beast. Fort of the Boreal Valley, the first major boss most players encounter in Dark Souls 3, is a massive armored figure wielding a giant mace, wreathed in frost, who charges at the player with the single-minded aggression of something that has lost everything except the drive to protect a perimeter. His lore is deeply connected to the dancers. They were sent to Lothric together as Outrider Knights under Pontiff Sullivan's command, both of them given the eye rings that would eventually transform them into feral beasts. In Irithil's streets, the two ghostly figures believed to represent Vort and the dancer are sometimes observed departing from the cathedral together. They were companions before they were monsters. Vort's original role in Lothric was to prevent anyone from escaping the corrupted city, to ensure the pus of man spreading through the Akibai population had nowhere to go. He did this with a shield and a mace and the armor of an Outrider Knight, until the ring drove him mad and the armor fused to his skin. The frostbite that his mace inflicts is a remnant of Irithil's cold, carried in his body from a place he no longer remembers the name of. The Estus Flask was given to the chosen undead as a gift. The Estus Flask, the primary healing item across all Dark Souls games, a golden vessel that fills with a luminescent liquid when you rest at a bonfire. carries specific significance in Dark Souls 3 that players from the original game will find familiar. The flask is, according to its lore, specifically a gift given to the unkindled, carved from the bones of Estus. It is described as containing the bleakness of the soul. In Dark Souls 3, you receive the flask immediately at the beginning, as a natural extension of starting your journey, and throughout the game, you can improve it by finding undead bone shards to burn at the Firelink Shrine bonfire. Each shard you find and burn was once part of an undead who burned beside a bonfire themselves. You are literally adding the remains of the dead to your fire to improve the medicine it produces. The Ashen Estus flask, added in Dark Souls 3 as a separate flask for spell uses, carries its own description relating to ashen power rather than radiant flame. Both versions exist as a reminder that what sustains you in this world is not fire for its own sake, but everything that has already burned. The Ringed City has enemies that fight for both light and dark. One of the more unusual details about the Ringed City's enemy composition is that the Hollow Clerics and the Ringed Knights who populate its streets are not organized by factional loyalty the way most of the game's enemies are. In the Ringed City, red-armored and blue-armored enemies, normally representing opposing covenants in the base game, fight alongside each other, or at least coexist in the same streets without hostility toward each other. The Hollow Assassins in the area can drop both Hollow Gems and Blessed Gems, items normally associated with entirely opposite builds and philosophies. The spell circles the cleric's cast combine elements of both light and dark magic. This integration is consistent with the Ringed City's nature as a place where the Dark Soul and its keepers were placed alongside Gwyn's divine architecture, where the great division between fire and dark that powered the whole mythology of the series was never quite as absolute as it appeared from the outside. In the oldest place in the world, at the end of everything, the binary had started to blur long before the fire faded. Siegward's questline is one of the longest in the game. Siegward of Katarina has one of the most elaborately staged questlines in Dark Souls 3, requiring you to encounter him in no fewer than 5 distinct locations over the course of the entire game. The Undead, Settlement Elevator, the Cathedral of the Deep Well, the Irithel Kitchen, the Irithel Dungeon Cell, and finally, Yhorm's Boss Room. Each encounter requires specific conditions to be met. In the settlement, you need to manipulate an elevator mechanism to reach him. In the cathedral, you need to recover his stolen armor from Patches. In Irithel, you need to enter the sewers and find him sitting by a fire with a bowl of Estus soup. In the dungeon, you need the old cell key to free him. And then you need to have spoken to him at the kitchen before entering the dungeon, or he won't appear in the cell at all. The questline is famous both for its warmth. Siegward is genuinely one of the game's most likable characters, a cheerful knight with a philosophical acceptance of difficulty, and for its fragility. A single missed conversation, a single out-of-sequence action, and the whole chain breaks. The game does not tell you this. It simply lets Yhorm fight alone. The Poos of Man is humanity's raw darkness. One of the more disturbing details in Dark Souls 3's creature design is the Poos of Man, a black writhing mass of darkness that erupts from human corpses throughout the game, particularly visible in the enemies on the high wall of Lothric, who have a second phase where a dark tentacled form bursts from their back and attacks. The description of items relating to the Poos of Man clarifies that it is not an infection or a disease in the conventional sense. It is the raw, uncontrolled manifestation of the Dark Soul's presence in human flesh. Every human being contains a fragment of the original Dark Soul. This is the fundamental theology of the Dark Soul series, the reason humans are the way they are, the reason the Age of Dark would be an age of humanity. When conditions are right, when the fire fades and the darkness accumulated inside a person overflows, the pus of man emerges. It is not a monster that attacks from outside. It is a monster that was always inside, waiting for the right conditions to express itself. The Lothric region's fall into darkness created exactly those conditions for its population. What the purse of man reveals is simply what was there all along. Henri Khan, become a sword in a wedding. The most unusual element of the usurpation of fire ending is the ceremony required to achieve it. After following Yuria of Londor's questline and meeting Henri of Astora at the church of Yoshka, a pilgrim sent by Yuria performs what is clearly meant to be a marriage ritual. But the specific shape of the ritual involves Henri being silenced, their soul becoming a sword, and the sword being literally stabbed into your character's body in order to accumulate the dark sigils needed for the ending. The imagery is deeply strange and deliberately unsettling. Your character stands in a room while a pilgrim performs the act using the body of someone you have followed and cared for throughout the game. Henri is aware of what is happening. The Ring of the Evil Eye, which Henri can give you earlier in the questline, is associated with sustenance through others' deaths, a hint at the transaction to come. The wedding that Yuria arranges is a consummation not of love but of power, and the pilgrim who performs it is an assassin disguised as a cleric. The ending you receive through this ceremony is not painted as triumphant or romantic. It is quiet, dark, and deeply human in its willingness to use what should be precious for what is merely useful. The Firekeeper's blindfold is a chosen limitation. The Firekeeper in Firelink Shrine wears a blindfold, which she has worn for so long that it has become definitional to her appearance. When you give her the eyes of the Firekeeper, she does not remove the blindfold immediately. She speaks about the eyes with a kind of awed uncertainty, about what it would mean to see the vision they contain, a world without fire. The eyes of a Firekeeper item description says they reveal things to eyeless Firekeepers that they were never intended to see. The blindfold, then, is not a physical disability or a cosmetic choice. It is a deliberate limitation placed on Firekeepers specifically to prevent them from knowing what is possible beyond the cycle they serve. The Firekeeper who has eyes and uses them will know that the flame does not have to continue. She will see that an alternative exists. She will, as Ludleth says, be equipped to betray the age. The blindfold is the institution's answer to the question of what happens when someone whose entire purpose is to serve the fire learns that the fire might be optional. The High Wall of Lothric shows a kingdom mid-collapse. The High Wall of Lothric, the first proper area of the game after the Cemetery of Ash, is a masterpiece of environmental storytelling in a game full of them. It is a city in the specific moment of its destruction. Not long ruined, not peacefully empty, but actively failing. The infected hollows are recent enough to still be wearing their clothes and carrying their tools. The dead bodies are fresh enough to still hold items worth looting. The poos of man eruptions are happening in real time. The fire demons have only recently arrived. The high wall is the edge of civilization at the precise moment the edge breaks, and walking through it means walking through someone else's catastrophe in progress. Vort's presence at the base of the wall, guarding not the people of Lothric but keeping the collapse contained. is a policy decision rather than a military one. Sullivan did not send Vought to help Lothric. He sent him to prevent whatever was happening in Lothric from spreading elsewhere. The high wall of Lothric is, functionally, a quarantine. You walk through the quarantine zone and emerge on the other side, because nothing in the quarantine can stop you. That is the specific quality of being Ashen One. Not that you are immune, but that you have already burned. The kiln of the first flame was built on a lie. The kiln of the first flame is the most sacred place in all of Dark Souls. The mythological center of the Age of Fire. The place where Gwyn linked himself to the flame and bought the world. Another age of light. By the time you arrive in Dark Souls 3, the kiln is a broken, ash-drifted ruin guarded by black knights who have been standing watch since the very first game. But the myth of the kiln, of sacrifice, of chosen lords giving themselves to sustain something greater, begins to unravel when you sit with what the lore actually says. The linking of the flame did not create the fire, it extended it. The first flame had already begun to fade long before Gwyn reached it. The ceremony of linking is, in the most mechanical terms, a temporary patch on a wound that was never going to heal. Gwyn burned himself, the god of sunlight, the most powerful figure in his pantheon, and bought perhaps a single cycle of continued fire. Every chosen undead, every Lord of Cinder who came after him, bought another. The cycle was not a noble tradition. It was a crisis response that everyone agreed to call a tradition, so the alternative would feel less inevitable. The kiln's grandeur, its enormous space, its ancient architecture, its dramatic approach, is the aesthetic of something that was never designed to be revisited. Gwyn built it as an ending. What comes after is everyone else doing what they could to turn an ending into a middle. The hollow gem changes. The weapon's relationship to the world. Among the upgrade materials available in Dark Souls 3, the hollow gem occupies a philosophically unusual position. Most upgrade paths are defined by elemental affinity or damage type. Fire, lightning, crystal, poison. The hollow gem, by contrast, scales a weapon's attack with the user's luck stat, and it gains additional scaling when the character has a high hollowing level. In other words, the more your character has lost, the more of their humanity has faded, the more their face has darkened and cracked, the further gone they are from whatever they used to be, the harder the weapon hits. The game is not being subtle about this. There is a direct mechanical relationship between the degree of your loss and the degree of your power. The hollow gem is associated with Yol, with Uria, with the Londa philosophy, that hollowness is not a curse but a condition of strength. The implication is not that suffering makes you stronger in the motivational sense. It is that what you are when you have been hollowed, stripped of the constructs that made you feel like a person, is something that connects to a deeper power than personhood allows. The hollow gem turns decay into damage. The philosophy of Londor says this is liberation. The question the game leaves open is whether it is wrong. The storyteller sold children to the fire in the undead settlement among the various oppressive and haunted structures you pass through. There is a figure known only as the storyteller, an old woman in a dark shawl who appears near the large fire in the settlement's lower section. She is not hostile immediately. She stands and she watches, and if you engage with her, she fights using a staff that inflicts toxic and fire. Her name, the storyteller, raises a quiet question the game never explicitly answers. What stories did she tell, and to whom did she tell them? The item descriptions associated with the undead settlement establish that its inhabitants were not passive victims of the fire worship that defined the area. The large burning effigy at the settlement center, the wooden structure constructed specifically for burning things, and the evangelist characters who spread the faith of flame throughout the settlement all speak to a culture that actively participated in offering its members to fire as a form of sanctification. The storyteller, given her name and position, most likely served as an intermediary, someone who gathered the children and the condemned by telling them that what waited ahead was something beautiful and divine. She fed people stories so they would walk into fire. In a world where fire is both literal and theological, she is one of the darkest human figures in the game, and she receives almost no attention at all. The Aldrich faithful hunt blue covenants on purpose. The Aldrich faithful covenant, accessible through the Archdeacon's chamber in Irithil of the Boreal Valley, functions as an invasion covenant. Members are summoned as dark spirits into the worlds of players who have been targeted by another mechanic's aggression. But the specific targeting of the Aldrich faithful is worth examining. They are drawn specifically to players who are being protected by the Blue Sentinels and Way of Blue Covenants, the game's primary defensive alliance, the system set up to protect new or vulnerable players from hostile invaders. The Aldrich faithful exist specifically to counter this protection. Where the Blue Sentinels send defenders, the Aldrich faithful sends hunters. This creates a meta layer of antagonism that mirrors the theological conflict in the game's lore. Aldrich and his church exist in direct opposition to the gods and their institutions, which the Way of Blue and Blades of Darkmoon covenants represent. The Covenant War is not random PvP. It is a structured conflict between the devotees of a devourer and the agents of the divine architecture he is eating his way through. That the players themselves are the combatants in this conflict. That real people on both sides are fighting a theological war without ever necessarily realizing it, is the kind of ambient design Dark Souls uses better than almost anything else in the medium. Orbek's ashes tell you exactly what happened to him if Orbek of Vinheim leaves Firelink Shrine, either because you failed to give him sorcery scrolls before the Abyss Watchers, or because you complete his questline and he sets out on his final journey. You can eventually find his ashes in the Grand Archives. His ashes are in a corner of one of the Archive's upper tiers, and turning them in to the Shrine Handmaid unlocks his remaining inventory for purchase. The location of his ashes tells its own quiet story. Orbek came to Dark Souls 3 in pursuit of knowledge, specifically the advanced sorceries housed in the Grand Archives that Lothric scholars had developed. He went there. He found what he was looking for, and he died there, among the books and the cursed scholars and the crystal sages, who had also come in pursuit of the work begun by Big Hat Logan. He spent his life accumulating knowledge in a world where knowledge was increasingly beside the point of survival, and he died in the largest library in the world, surrounded by people who had made the same mistake. There is no monument to him. There is no dramatic conclusion. His ashes are in a corner, and the Shrine Handmaid sells his spells for souls, and the Grand Archives continues to exist regardless of who it has consumed. Champion Gunda is the cost of being too late. Champion Gunda, the boss of the Untended Graves, the dark version of the game's first area, is mechanically and narratively the counterpart to Udex Gunda, the tutorial boss, but the distinction between them is everything. Udex Gunda arrived too late and was impaled with a coiled sword as both punishment and placeholder, kept in stasis until an unkindled could find and fight him, claim the sword, and light the shrine. He is weakened, corrupted by the pus of man growing in his chest, operating at a fraction of what he could have been. Champion Gunda in the untended graves is what he would have been if the pus of man had not taken hold. He is fast, aggressive, relentless, and deeply impressive in a way that the tutorial version is not. His soul description tells you that he was a champion who came too late and found only a cold and empty shrine. The implication, when taken with the untended grave's identity as a version of the past, is that Gunda arrived before an unkindled was ready, before the cycle had produced someone who could pull the coiled sword and begin again. He found darkness where he expected fire, and the darkness simply kept him. Judex Gunda is what lateness looks like when it is managed. Champion Gunda is what lateness looks like when there is no management. Both versions of the same man, defined entirely by timing. Aegon of Karim protects Irina for his own reasons. Aegon of Karim is introduced as a bodyguard accompanying the imprisoned Irina, and from the moment you meet him, he communicates that your arrival is not welcome and your intentions are not trusted. He releases Irina to your care grudgingly and makes clear that if any harm comes to her, the consequences will involve him finding you. His armor description and demeanor establish him as someone who operates outside the usual religious framework of his homeland. He has distanced himself from Karim's traditional practices, described as dark and ritualistic, and committed himself instead to a single personal obligation. The nature of that obligation opens up as Irina's questline develops. Aegon was asked by someone he respected, or perhaps by Irina herself through some prior relationship, to protect her. He does not do this for faith. He does not do it for a covenant or a lord. He does it because he said he would, and the distance between his word and his life appears to be very small. If Irina is corrupted by dark tomes and becomes a finger maiden, Aegon considers this your fault, and he attacks you in Filing Shrine. His shield description speaks of his home as a place he cannot return to. Irina is, in some complicated way, the last thing he is doing that feels worth doing. The Crucifixion Woods hides a path to a secret boss. Between the Crucifixion Woods bonfire in the Road of Sacrifices and the Cathedral of the Deep lies a section of waist-deep water regularly visited, mostly to find the Farron coal and a few useful items. What many players miss entirely is that within the water, if you explore the submerged ruins carefully rather than heading directly toward the cathedral, there is a submerged doorway and a path that leads to a hidden boss, the optional Hydra-like creature lurking in the Crucifixion Woods pond, and more significantly, through a cave containing a crystal lizard and emerging into a section near Farron Keep perimeter, the interconnected geography of the game's middle section, where the swamp of Farron Keep and the water of the Road of Sacrifices share a drainage system, is one of the more impressive feats of world building in the game. Players who explore thoroughly find connections between areas that seem separate, find that the world has a physical logic even when that logic is submerged. The ruins under the water in the Crucifixion Woods appear to be ancient enough that the road was built above them rather than around them. A civilization's floor become another civilization's basement. The Exile Greatsword belongs to a knight who was banished. The Exile Greatsword, one of the most powerful curved greatswords in the game, dropped by the larger of the two exile knights guarding the Farron Keep entrance, carries in its description a precise and melancholy history. The exile knights, both the sword user and his companion, who fights with a longer curved sword, are described as warriors banished from Lothric, and exiled to the surrounding wilderness. The description does not say why. It simply notes that they were cast out, and that they remained together in exile, still fighting in formation as trained knights. These two figures have given up nothing of their martial discipline despite having been deprived of the institution that gave their training meaning. They guard nothing, they serve no one. They are simply two soldiers who were told to go away, and they have kept fighting the way soldiers fight because it is the only thing they know how to be. Their cooperation, their continued loyalty to each other when loyalty to everything else was voided, is the specific quality that makes them one of the most dangerous encounters in the game. The exile did not break them. It simply narrowed what they were willing to protect down to each other. Dark Firelink Shrine has a slightly different handmaid. When you reach the untended graves, the dark version of the Cemetery of Ash and Firelink Shrine, you find the shrine handmaid sitting in her customary spot, same as always. But this version of the shrine handmaid sells different items. Her inventory in the untended graves includes things not available from her normal counterpart, including the Hornet Ring, a critical damage ring that increases the damage of riposte attacks, which sits behind a wall in the dark shrine. The existence of a second handmaid in a version of Firelink that represents the past raises a quiet question about whether the handmaid in the normal Firelink shrine is the same person, a different person, or something more complicated. Both handmaids are identical in appearance. Both speak with the same deliberate, quiet cadence. Neither of them volunteers information about the other. The most commonly accepted interpretation is that the shrine handmaid has always been there, that she is one of the figures, like Andre the blacksmith and the firekeeper, whose existence is tied to the shrine in a way that ordinary mortality does not govern. She is always there. She was there in the past. She will be there in the dark version of the shrine long after the fire is gone. The Farron Flash Sword is a scholar's combat technique. Farron Flash Sword, one of the unique sorceries available in Dark Souls 3, functions differently from almost every other spell in the game. Rather than projecting a magical effect at range, it creates a brief magical blade extension on the casting hand, allowing the sorcerer to perform a quick melee attack with their spell. Its description explicitly frames it as a technique developed for sorcerers who found themselves in melee range without the option to disengage, a combat adaptation for scholars who were not primarily trained as warriors. The name Farron in this context connects the spell to the Undead Legion and to the Road of Sacrifices region, and the spell is obtained from the Crystal Sage, whose own scholarly lineage traces to Big Hat Logan. The implication is that scholars in the Road of Sacrifices region encountered enough unexpected close combat that they developed a standardized solution, a magical blade extension that operates on a sorcery cast is not an offensive innovation. It is a panic button that someone was disciplined enough to formalize. The fact that it is a viable combat option, genuinely fast and effective as a close-range tool, says something interesting about what happens when academic problem-solving is applied to survival. The Swordmaster behind Firelink has a name: the Swordmaster, the optional NPC who appears outside the door on the left side of Firelink Shrine before you ring the bell and activate most of the shrine's NPCs, is one of the game's most easily overlooked characters. He appears drunk, slumped against the wall, holding a katana. If you engage him in combat, he fights with impressive speed and the katana style, and defeating him earns you the Uchigatana and potentially his ashes. But he has a name, or rather, a title, that positions him within the game's broader lore. He is described as a master swordsman who arrived at Firelink Shrine and simply stopped going further. He teaches you nothing. He sells nothing. He appears to have chosen to remain outside the shrine rather than enter it, as though the decision to sit in the cold with a bottle of something and wait for the end was more honest than any of the alternatives on offer inside. He is not a villain. He is not a mystery the game expects you to solve. He is simply a man who was very good at something that doesn't matter anymore, making the most rational decision available to him in that circumstance. Sitting down. There is a second firekeeper hidden in every playthrough. The eyes of a firekeeper item, the pair of dark, ancient eyes found in the untended graves, comes with a description noting that they were taken from a dead firekeeper. This firekeeper's body is in the dark version of Firelink Shrine, positioned behind the hidden wall that requires seeking out. She is not the firekeeper you interact with throughout the normal game. She is a predecessor, someone who held the same role in a previous iteration of the cycle or different phase of the present one, and who was killed or died or was simply used up in the course of her function. The eyes being found on her corpse suggests she was not allowed to keep them while she served, that the blindfold was imposed on her as well, and that the eyes only became findable after she was gone. The untended graves is supposed to represent the past, which means this dead firekeeper represents an earlier attendant, not a parallel present one. The normal firekeeper in Firelink Shrine has an immediate predecessor who already lived through the role, already lost the right to see, and is still there in the dark behind a wall, her most important feature removed and waiting on her chest for whoever comes next. The Undead Legion drank wolf blood as initiation. The Abyss Watchers are the Lords of Cinder who linked the flame through collective sacrifice rather than individual heroism. Dozens of warriors simultaneously offering themselves to sustain the fire, their combined soul becoming a single Lord soul. But the detail that defines how they became the Abyss Watchers before that sacrifice is the wolf blood. The Undead Legion of Farron, from which the Abyss Watchers emerged, practiced a specific initiation rite, drinking the blood of a wolf to absorb something of Artorius' essence. Artorius, the Abyss Walker, had bonded with his wolf companion Sif, had tainted his sword arm with the Abyss in an act of containing it, and had become the defining model for the kind of fighter who chooses to face darkness rather than avoid it. The Undead Legion wanted to be that kind of fighter. They drank his legacy and learned to fight like him, and over generations of this, they became something indistinguishable from what they had been imitating. By the time you face the Abyss Watchers, they are not people who trained in Artorius' style. They are extensions of him. His will become theirs through repetition and ritual until the original personality dissolved and only the mission remained. They failed to contain the Abyss, but they never stopped fighting it. Even in death, they fight each other, unable to tell the enemy within from the enemy without. The Chaos-Bed vestiges come from the Witches of Izalith. The Chaos-Bed vestiges pyromancy, one of the most powerful fire-based spells in Dark Souls 3, is described as containing the heat of the original flame of chaos, the fire the Witch of Izalith created when she attempted to duplicate the first flame. The witch's attempt failed catastrophically. She could not create a true first flame, only a distorted reflection of one that consumed her daughters, and her entire civilization and gave birth to the demons. That flame, the Chaos Flame, has been fading since the events of the original Dark Souls. By Dark Souls 3, it is nearly extinct. The Chaos-Bed vestiges are, in a sense, a preserved ember of something that should not have existed, and is finally almost gone. Casting the spell releases that ancient corrupted heat in a concentrated burst that the game represents as one of the most viscerally satisfying visual effects in its pyromancy roster. There is something darkly appropriate in the idea that the most destructive fire magic available to the player comes not from the legitimate divine flame, but from the failed copy, from the mistake that ended a civilization and burned without purpose for thousands of years, now compressed into something a wandering knight can throw at bosses. Yorm's throne is empty by his choice. The 5 thrones in the Firelink Shrine, the seats designated for the Lords of Cinder, whose return is the game's central objective, are not empty because their owners abandoned them. They are empty because their owners died, sacrificed themselves, and are now ash and memory. The throne system implies an expectation of return, that the Lords of Cinder would be resurrected by the bell ringing that begins the game's plot, and would return to fulfill their cycle. Yorm's throne is perhaps the most poignant of the 5. He sits there, in the end, only because he is forced back into existence. He did not want to be a Lord of Cinder because he wanted to be remembered, or powerful, or divine. He wanted the people of the profane capital to live safely. They did not. He became a Lord of Cinder anyway, as penance, the only thing left he could do for them. When the bell calls him back, there is no joy in it. He is being used for a purpose that has nothing to do with the promise he made to his city. He storms his throne room alone because Sigurd isn't there unless you find him, and he waits. There is no one left to protect. There is only the fire and the cycle and the friend who promised to come. The Knight of the Boreal Valley hides in plain sight. Throughout Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, you encounter Silver Knights, tall, elegant armored guards carrying spears or bows, who defend the city's winding streets and elegant architecture. Players recognize them as a design callback to the Silver Knights from Anna Londo in Dark Souls 1, a deliberate continuity between the ancient city and the city that grew around and from it. What is easy to miss is the specific enemy in a corner of the first indoor area after crossing the long bridge. A single Silver Knight standing in a room that connects to the Pontiff Sulivan boss area. This knight is positioned in a spot that seems decorative, part of the architecture, and many players run past without engaging. He hits very hard. He has more poise than his street patrol counterparts, and he has been standing in that room, in that corner, for the entire duration of whatever has happened to Irithyll. He is not ambushing you, he is keeping his post. There is something quietly remarkable about a guard who is still at his station after every political upheaval the city has endured. The Pontiff's takeover, the corruption of the Outrider Knights, the freezing of the streets, all of it. He was told to guard this room. He is guarding this room. Greirat carries a blue tearstone ring. When Greirat of the Undead Settlement is imprisoned in the high wall of Lothric, he is wearing specific equipment that the careful player can note before freeing him. Among his possessions is the blue tearstone ring, a ring that boosts defense when health falls below a certain threshold. A defensive item suited to someone who frequently finds themselves on the verge of death and needs to find the edge that keeps them standing. This ring fits Greirat's character exactly. A man who operates in dangerous places, often alone, doing work that requires going further than is strictly safe, and coming back with something useful. The blue tearstone ring is not a ring for fighters who control their environment. It is a ring for people who cannot control their environment and need something to keep them alive in the last moment, before it becomes too late. That Greirat was wearing it, when you found him suggests he's been operating at the edge of his survivability for a long time, and that the skills that kept him alive before his imprisonment were the same skills that made him useful enough for Loretta to believe in. He is not a hero. He is a man who knows how to survive being nearly dead and who keeps going anyway because someone once thought he was worth going for. The giant blacksmith's hammer travels across games. Andre the blacksmith in Firelink Shrine was, in the original Dark Souls, one of the game's most useful and beloved NPCs. A quiet craftsman who could upgrade weapons to great effectiveness and who traded his services without judgment. Dark Souls 3 brings him back, still at his forge, still patient, still willing to improve your weapons in exchange for materials and souls. But it is the giant blacksmith from the original game, who appeared in Anor Londo as a larger, slower version of Andre's archetype, whose legacy gets the most interesting treatment in Dark Souls 3. The giant blacksmith's hammer from the original game can be found in Dark Souls 3 as a weapon. The giant's coal, which enables infusions, and the smith's hammer itself appear in Anor Londo, in the same location the giant blacksmith once occupied. He is gone. His hammer remains. His coal remains. The room where he sat has been converted into one of the most dangerous areas in Anor Londo. But his tools are still there, still useful, still capable of enabling the same infusion work as performed himself. In Dark Souls 3, the craftsman is gone, and only the craft remains. This is perhaps the most honest statement the series makes about what endures.